close your eyes. Let the heavy curtains of the present world fall away, leaving you in a quiet velvet darkness. Take a deep breath, and as you exhale, imagine the salty, sharp scent of the sea filling your lungs. You are no longer in your room. You are standing on the swaying wooden deck of a great ship, surrounded by the creaking of timber and the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull. The year is 1346, and we are floating in the English Channel, suspended between the white cliffs of home and the unknown shores of France. The light is grey and pearlescent, a soft, diffused glow filtering through a summer mist that clings to the water like a ghost. Around you, the world is a forest of masts. 700 ships, perhaps even 1,000, bob gently on the swell, their colourful banners snapping in the wind, crimson, azure and gold, lions and lilies dancing together in a heraldic display of defiance. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Now, let your gaze drift to the prow of the lead ship. There stands a figure, wrapped in the heavy wool of a campaign cloak, his golden hair catching the elusive sunlight. This is Edward III, King of England, a man in the prime of his life at 33 years old. He does not look like a man seeking mere plunder. He looks like a man claiming an inheritance. Beside him stands a tall, lanky boy of 16, eager and clad in black armour that seems to swallow the light, his son, Edward, the Prince of Wales, who history will one day remember as the Black Prince. They watch the coastline of Normandy materialise through the fog, a dark ribbon of land that promises both glory and ruin. This is not just a raid, it is an assertion of power, a grand floating city of archers, knights, horses and ambition moving inexorably toward the unsuspecting beach of Saint-Vaz-la-Hougue. The landing itself is a chaotic ballet of logistics and muscle. Listen to the sounds of the disembarkation, the splash of anchors hitting the water, the shouting of sailors hauling ropes, the nervous whinnying of destriers being lowered into the surf. Horses, as any knight will tell you, are notoriously poor sailors, and they shake the salt from their manes with indignant snorts as their hooves finally find the firm, wet sand. There is a curious legend often whispered about this moment, a story that mirrors the arrival of William the Conqueror nearly 3 centuries prior. It is said that as King Edward steps off his ship, his foot slips on the wet stones and he falls forward, his hands grasping the French earth. A collective gasp ripples through his retinue. A king falling is surely a terrible omen, a sign that God opposes the venture. But Edward, quick-witted and fierce, supposedly rises with his hands full of sand and shouts that he has merely embraced the land that is rightfully his. Historians still argue whether this actually happened, or if chroniclers merely borrowed the convenient myth from William's story to add a layer of destiny to Edward's campaign. Myth or fact, the image remains powerful. A king on his knees, not in prayer, but in possession. The army that spills onto the beach is a marvel of medieval organisation, yet it carries the scent of the barnyard and the village, green as much as the castle. While the knights in their burnished plate armour draw the eye, look closer at the men gathering by the dunes. These are not high-born lords. They are yeomen, farmers and foresters from the shires of England and Wales. They wear padded gambesons stained with travel, and they carry staves of yew wood that are taller than they are. They are the longbowmen. They sit on the sand, checking their bowstrings for dampness, sharing skins of ale, and cracking quiet jokes about the quality of French mud. They seem relaxed, almost out of place, amidst the grandeur of the heraldry. Yet they are the coiled spring of this invasion. As the sun begins to dip lower, casting long golden shadows across the beach, the sheer scale of the invasion force becomes clear. 15,000 men, thousands of horses, wagons, piled high with arrows, grain, and blacksmith's tools. The beach at Samvast has been transformed into a bustling English town, smelling of wood smoke and roasting meat as campfires flicker to life against the twilight. The local French militia, caught entirely by surprise, has scattered like leaves before a storm. There is no great battle here, only the ominous, heavy silence of a land holding its breath. Edward establishes his headquarters in a local abbey, the stone walls cool and echoing with the clatter of armoured boots. He is not here to hold territory, town by town. He is here to conduct a chevauchée, a ride. The strategy is brutal in its simplicity. Burn the countryside, destroy the wealth of the French king, Philip Célestin, and goad him into a battle on Edward's terms. It is a cruel form of warfare, targeting the peasantry to hurt the crown, a strategy that sits uncomfortably with our modern notions of chivalry. Yet, in the soft glow of the campfire, the soldiers do not discuss politics or the morality of scorched earth. They talk of the march ahead. They talk of the loot. Rich silks, golden chalices, casks of fine Bordeaux wine that surely await them in the towns of Normandy. There is a sense of adventure, a nervous energy that hums through the camp like a plucked string. The air cools as night fully descends, bringing with it the sounds of the ocean tide retreating, pulling back to England as the army looks inward, toward the heart of France. The stars emerge, ancient and indifferent, witnessing the beginning of a march that will lead to a ridge called Crécy. But for now, there is only the beach, the firelight, and the waiting. The English army sleeps under the foreign sky, a slumber deep and dreamless, unaware that they are resting on the edge of history. The invasion has begun, not with a clash of steel, but with the quiet, heavy thud of boots on sand and the confident laughter of a king who believes the world is his for the taking. This opening reveals that the true power of Edward's invasion lies not in violence, but in confidence. Before a single village burns or arrow flies, the army arrives already convinced of its right to be there. The myth of Edward grasping the French soil, whether borrowed or true, matters because it frames conquest as destiny rather than decision. Belief precedes brutality. There is a gentle parallel here with the Roman legions landing in Britain centuries earlier. Like Edward's force, they brought engineers, supply wagons, and farmers' sons alongside elite soldiers. Empire does not begin as chaos. It begins as organisation moving calmly into someone else's world. That calm is what makes it frightening. Why this matters is that war often feels inevitable only in retrospect. On this beach, nothing has yet gone wrong. The men joke, fires crackle, horses settle. History has not revealed its cost. Some historians argue the chevauchée was reckless, more raid than strategy, and that Edward gambled dangerously on French response. That may be so. Yet in this moment, confidence itself is the weapon. The army sleeps believing the future belongs to them. And belief, once shared by thousands, can bend events as powerfully as steel. The army begins to move, uncoiling from the beaches like a great iron-scaled serpent waking from a long slumber. The march inland is slow, rhythmic, and shockingly beautiful in its terrible purpose. Normandy, in high summer, is a painter's dream of abundance. The orchards are heavy with ripening apples. The wheat fields are sheets of hammered gold rippling in the breeze, and the air is thick with the lazy buzzing of bees who know nothing of kings or wars. You can almost feel the heat radiating off the dusty road, a dry, baking warmth that settles into the heavy wool of the soldiers' coats. The English force divides into 3 parallel columns, a trident of men and horses moving purposefully south and east. They are not marching in silence. There is a low, constant rumble that vibrates through the soles of your feet, the tramping of 30,000 boots, the creak of leather saddles, the clatter of pots and pans dangling from the baggage wagons. This is the chevauchée. The word itself sounds elegant, rolling off the tongue like a dance step, but the reality is a calculated dismantling of a kingdom. As the columns advance, they leave a signature behind them, written in the sky: smoke. It begins as thin wisps, grey and tentative, rising from barns and windmills, but soon it thickens into great billowing pillars of charcoal and black that blot out the summer sun. Edward is not merely stealing, he is humiliating his rival. By burning the rich countryside of Normandy, he is proving that King Philip cannot protect his own people, stripping away the divine mandate of the French crown with every torched granary. It is psychological warfare enacted with flint and steel. Yet, amidst this destruction, there is a strange, surreal quality to the daily life of the invading soldier. Imagine walking alongside a longbowman from the forests of Sherwood or the valleys of Wales. For years, he has eaten pottage and hard bread. Now, he finds himself marching through a land that seems to overflow with milk and honey. The soldiers feast on fresh roast goose, tender lamb, and soft white bread looted from abandoned farmhouses. There is a touch of dark humour in their discovery of French wine. Men used to watery ale taste the rich, complex vintages of the continent for the first time, their eyes widening in surprise, perhaps joking that if the war consisted only of drinking the enemy's cellars dry, they would happily volunteer for another 10 years. They are tourists with swords, marvelling at the architecture of the stone churches, even as they strip the silver candlesticks from the altars. The army moves like a plague of locusts, but a well-fed, cheerful plague. The destination of this initial push is Caen, the cultural jewel of Normandy. It is a wealthy city, larger than most English towns of the time, fat with the profits of the cloth trade. As Edward's forces approach, the city walls loom tall and formidable, but the defenders are panicked. The fighting that erupts here is fierce, a sudden spike of violence in the long, hot march. The English archers, eager to prove their worth, wade into the shallow branches of the river Odon, sending arrows humming into the defenders on the bridge. The city falls not through a prolonged siege, but in a chaotic rush of adrenaline and opportunity. The sack of Caen is thorough. The English fleet, which has been shadowing the army along the coast, is called in to load the spoils. It is said that the ships ride low in the water on their return journey to England, weighed down by bales of fine cloth, jewels and gold, enough wealth to buy a new coat for every man in London, or so the rumours go. It is a redistribution of fortune on a massive scale, the wealth of centuries siphoned off in a matter of days. Historians often debate the true intent of Edward's strategy during these weeks. Was he genuinely hoping to draw Philip into a decisive battle immediately, or was he simply intent on an economic raid to pay his debts? The meticulous way he recorded the loot suggests the latter, yet the path he cuts is a direct challenge, a gauntlet thrown at the feet of the French throne. Meanwhile, the smoke of the chevauchée drifts east, carried by the wind, until it can be smelled in the streets of Paris. King Philip VI is not idle, but he is paralysed by the sheer audacity of the invasion. He is gathering a massive army at Saint-Denis, declaring the arrière-ban a summons for every able-bodied man to fight. But feudal armies are slow, lumbering beasts. It takes weeks for a knight to travel from the south of France to the north, weeks to gather supplies, weeks to navigate the egos of squabbling dukes. Philip watches the reports of burning villages pile up on his table like autumn leaves, his fury growing with every messenger. He calls Edward a wolf, a bandit king who fights without honour. But Edward is not listening to insults, he is listening to the map. Having stripped Caen, the English army turns east, aiming for the River Seine. The mood begins to shift. The easy looting is over, and the strategic reality sets in. They are deep in enemy territory, hundreds of miles from home, and the French army is finally moving. The landscape changes, becoming more difficult, the roads narrower, the smoke that once signalled their triumph now marks their position for the hunters closing in. Edward reaches the Seine hoping to cross and perhaps threaten Paris itself, but he finds the bridges broken. Philip, intelligent and cautious, has ordered a scorched earth policy of his own, destroying the crossings to trap the English on the west bank. Every bridge Edward approaches is a ruin of charred timber or heavily defended by Genoese crossbowmen. The game of cat and mouse begins. The English march south along the riverbank, looking for a way across, while on the opposite bank the growing French army matches their pace, a mirror image of vengeance. The soldiers can sometimes see the French scouts across the water, dark silhouettes against the twilight, watching, counting, waiting. The banter about wine and roast goose fades, replaced by the hushed, serious tones of men who realise the trap is closing. The rivers of France, the Seine and the Somme, are becoming walls of water, penning them in. Yet, even in this rising tension, the narrative pace remains hypnotic. The boots continue to fall in rhythm. Left, right, a heartbeat on the dusty road. The sun sets earlier each day as August matures, casting long violet shadows that stretch across the fields like grasping fingers. The air grows heavy with the promise of thunderstorms. Edward remains calm, his face a mask of regal confidence, riding near the front, studying the river, looking for the ripple in the water that signifies a ford. He knows that he cannot march forever. Eventually, he must turn and face the storm he has summoned. The chevauchée has done its work, the land is burned, the pockets are full, and the enemy is awake. Now, the raid must become a campaign, and the looters must become an army once more. The road leads north now, toward the Somme, toward the sea, and toward a destiny that is waiting in the mud of a quiet hillside. The narrative camera shifts now, panning upward to view the chessboard of northern France from the perspective of a hawk circling in the thermal currents. Below, the landscape is a patchwork of green and gold, bisected by the silvery winding ribbons of great rivers. The English army, once a slow-moving beast of burden laden with loot, has transformed into a desperate sprinting animal. We are leaving the banks of the Seine behind. Edward, displaying that mixture of tactical brilliance and sheer audacity that defines his reign, has pulled off a sleight of hand at the town of Poissy, just miles from the walls of Paris. While the French citizens of the capital watch the smoke rising from their windows, trembling at the thought of a siege, Edward's engineers, those unsung heroes with hammers and nails, working with frantic speed, rebuilt a shattered bridge under the noses of the enemy. The army slipped across the Seine, turning their backs on Paris and the riches of the south, facing north toward the safety of Flanders. But the escape is an illusion, a temporary reprieve in a tightening noose. The race is on. To the south and east, the French army is moving with the momentum of a landslide. King Philip has unfurled the oriflamme, the sacred crimson war banner of Saint Denis. It is a terrifying signal, a strip of red silk that speaks a single bloody sentence: no prisoners, no quarter. Total annihilation. The English soldiers, who only days ago were joking about wine vintages, now march with grim, silent determination. The pace is punishing. They cover 14, sometimes 18 miles a day in full kit, a grueling marathon performed in leather boots that are beginning to wear thin on the chalky roads of Picardy. The air is different here. The lush warmth of Normandy has given way to the flat, wind-swept plains of the north, where the sky feels vast and pressing. You can hear the change in the sound of the march. The rhythm is faster, more urgent, the jingle of harness metal sharper in the cooling air. The sun is a pale disk behind high, drifting clouds, casting a light that feels stripped of colour, emphasising the bleak reality of their position. They are heading for the River Somme, the last great barrier between them and the friendly territories of Flanders. But the Somme is not merely a river, it is a complex, treacherous network of marshes, tidal estuaries, and deep channels that scar the landscape for miles. It is a wet, muddy wall. As the English vanguard approaches the river valley, the news filters back down the line, passed from scout to knight, from knight to archer, in hushed, worried tones. Every bridge is broken, every ford is guarded. Philip's scorched earth policy has extended here too. The French have arrived first, guarding the northern bank with thousands of troops, effectively sealing the door. Edward tries the bridge at Pont-Remy, but finds it heavily defended by a force that repels his scouts with a shower of crossbow bolts. He pushes west to Longpré, then to Fontaine-sur-Somme, probing the river like a trapped wolf testing the bars of a cage. At every turn, the answer is the same. The way is shut. The English army is now squeezed into a shrinking triangle of land. To their right flows the impassable Somme. To their left, the English Channel creates a watery dead end, and behind them, closing the distance with every hour, comes Philip's host, now swelling to nearly 6 times the size of Edward's force. The tension in the English camp is palpable, a physical weight that settles on the shoulders of every man. Even the horses seem to sense it, their ears pinning back, their movements jittery and reactive. Historians often pause here to debate the mindset of Edward III during these critical days. Was he truly seeking battle, as he later claimed, or was he frantically trying to save his army from total destruction? The evidence of his movements suggests a man looking for an exit, any exit, to preserve the lives of his men and the loot they carried. Yet there is no panic in his demeanour. He rides tall, his face impassible, projecting a calm he likely does not feel. He knows that fear is more contagious than the plague, and a king who looks afraid is a king who has already lost. In the evenings, the camp is quieter than before. The fires are smaller, kept low to avoid giving away their precise location to the French scouts prowling the darkness. The food is running low. The bread is stale, and the looted delicacies are long gone, replaced by scavenged turnips and hard biscuits. There is a dry, ironic humour that surfaces in the ranks, the kind born of shared misery. Soldiers mutter that they walked all the way to France just to learn that the French don't know how to build a proper bridge, or that King Philip is so hospitable he insists on escorting them personally to the coast. It is a soft, grumbling laughter that keeps despair at bay. But the reality is stark. If they cannot cross the Somme, they will be pinned against the water and slaughtered. On the evening of August 23rd, the situation reaches a crisis point. The army is halted at the town of Oisemont, the smoke of their own burning campfires marking their location to the pursuing French, who are now only a day's march away, close enough that the English rearguard can almost smell the dust of the enemy column. Edward needs a miracle. He summons his prisoners, local peasants and minor knights swept up in the raid, and offers a king's ransom, freedom and gold to anyone who can show him a way across the river. Most remain silent, bound by loyalty or fear of Philip's wrath. But one man, a peasant named Gobin Agas, steps forward. His voice is trembling, but clear. He speaks of a place called Blanchetaque, the white spot. It is a ford, he explains, marked by a bed of white chalk stones that keep the footing firm. But there is a catch, a detail that turns the hope into a terrifying gamble. The ford is tidal. Twice a day, the sea rushes in from the channel, burying the crossing under 10 feet of swirling, drowning water. It is passable only for a few hours at low tide, a narrow window of time dictated by the moon and the ocean. If they arrive too late, they drown. If they arrive too early, They are sitting ducks on the bank, and waiting on the other side, Goben warns, is a French force under the command of Godemar Dufour, tasked with holding the ford at all costs. Edward listens, his blue eyes sharp and calculating. He looks at the setting sun, then at the tide charts, then at his exhausted army. He has no choice. He orders the camp to break before dawn. They will march for Blanchetaque. The section ends here, in the cold pre-dawn darkness, with the army assembling in silence, the mist clinging to their cloaks. They're walking toward a river that might drown them, to fight an enemy waiting to kill them, with a massive army nipping at their heels. The trap is set, the pieces are moving, and the only way out is through the water. The world is grey and ghostly at this hour, suspended in the fragile silence between night and dawn. The army is moving again, stumbling through the mist that clings to the low-lying marshes of the Somme Valley. It is the morning of August 24th, a day that begins not with the glory of trumpets, but with the wet, sucking sound of boots pulling free from mud. The English column is a desperate animal now. Hunted and cornered, they have marched through the darkness to reach the spot Goben Agace promised, the place called Blanchetaque. When they arrive, the sun is just beginning to bleed a pale, watery light through the overcast sky, revealing the river before them. And here, the heart of every man in the vanguard sinks. The river is not a ford, it is a flood. The tide is full, a swirling, muscular torrent of grey water rushing inland from the sea, far too deep for a man to walk, let alone a horse laden with armour. The timing is catastrophic. They have arrived too early, or perhaps too late, depending on how you measure the mercy of the ocean. The tide will not turn for hours. And so the army is forced to do the one thing that is harder than fighting. They must wait. Imagine standing on that marshy bank, the damp cold seeping into your bones, watching the water churn past, knowing that every minute that ticks by brings King Philip's army closer to your back. The tension is a physical pressure, tightening the chest. The soldiers check their weapons, not out of necessity, but for something to do with their hands. They look south, scanning the horizon for the first glint of French steel, the first rising dust cloud that signals the end of their journey. Hours drag by, like years. It is a slow-motion torture, a test of nerve, where the enemy is not a man, but the moon's pull on the tides. Across the river, on the northern bank, the situation is no better. Through the mist, they can see the enemy waiting for them. Godemar Dufour, a seasoned French commander, has been sent with 3,500 men, knights, Genoese crossbowmen, and infantry, to hold this exact crossing. They are lined up on the opposite shore, a wall of steel mirrored in the rushing water. The English are trapped in a vice, the impassable river in front, the massive French host closing in from behind. Finally, just as the sun climbs high enough to burn off the last of the morning fog, the water begins to recede. It happens slowly at first, then with increasing speed, revealing the white chalk bed that gives the ford its name, Blanchetaque. The white spot, the pale stones shimmer under the shallowing water like a submerged road paved by giants. It is around 8 in the morning when the water drops to knee depth. It is time. There is no speech, no grand gesture. The order ripples down the line. Advance. The English vanguard, led by the most experienced knights and the best archers, steps into the river. The water is freezing, a shock that steals the breath, swirling around greaves and soaking through woolen hose. But this is not a simple wade across a stream. It is an assault. As the English splash into the channel, the Genoese crossbowmen on the far bank raise their weapons. The air fills with the sharp thwack of release, and bolts hiss into the water, skipping off the surface or thudding into wooden shields. The English longbowmen wading abreast of the knights stop in the middle of the river. Imagine the balance required, standing in a rushing current, water tugging at your waist, planting your feet on slippery chalk and drawing 100-pound bow. Yet they do it. They settle into the rhythm of their trade. They draw, aim and loose. The arrows fly in a high arc, a deadly rain falling on the French bank. The range of the longbow begins to tell. The Genoese trying to reload their crossbows, a slow, mechanical process involving a stirrup and a crank, are pinned down by the relentless volume of English fire. They begin to waver. Seizing the moment, the English knights roar a challenge and surge forward, churning the water into white foam. The two lines meet not on dry land, but in the shallows of the river's edge. The Battle of Blanchetaque is a strange, chaotic skirmish, fought in a medium that slows every movement to a dreamlike trudge. Men grapple in the spray, the water turning pink with blood that is instantly washed away by the current. Horses slip and thrash, their iron shoes scrabbling for purchase on the chalk. It is a brawl of heavy metal and cold water. The French knights under Godemar fight hard. They know that if they hold the bank, the English are finished. But they cannot withstand the pressure. The English, driven by the terrifying certainty that death waits behind them, fight with the ferocity of trapped rats. They push, they shove, they hack their way up the muddy slope of the northern bank. Slowly, agonizingly, the French line buckles. The Genoese break first, unnerved by the arrows, and the panic spreads to the men-at-arms. With a final, crushing effort, the English vanguard punches a hole through the defenders and spills onto the dry grass of the northern shore. The cork is popped. The rest of the English army begins to pour across the ford, a river of men crossing a river of water. Wagons rattle over the white stones, drivers whipping the oxen, wheels spraying water as they race the returning tide. It is a scene of organised panic, thousands of men scrambling to safety as the water level begins to creep up once more. And then the cinematic climax of the morning occurs. A moment so perfect it feels written by a dramatist. Just as the last of the English baggage train struggles up the northern bank, the vanguard of King Philip's army arrives on the southern shore. They are close, so close, that the English can see the faces of the French knights contorted with rage. The French spur their horses toward the water, ready to chase their prey down. But the ocean intervenes. The tide, relentless and indifferent to the desires of kings, comes rushing back in with the force of a train. The ford vanishes under a swirl of grey waves. The French are forced to rein in their horses at the water's edge, helpless, watching the English army reform on the other side. King Philip arrives moments later, staring across the impassable barrier, his prize snatched away by the moon and the sea. He screams in frustration, but there is nothing to be done. To cross now would be suicide. The English have escaped. They are wet, cold and exhausted, but they are alive, and they are on the right side of the river. The psychological impact of this crossing cannot be overstated. To the medieval mind, this is not just luck, it is providence. God has parted the waters for Edward, just as he did for Moses. A murmur goes through the English ranks. Perhaps they are not just looters on a raid. Perhaps they are the righteous army after all. The victory at Blanchetaque gives them something more valuable than gold. It gives them belief. But Edward knows the reality is simpler and more dangerous. He has bought time, but he has not bought safety. He is still outnumbered, and Philip will simply march to the nearest bridge at Abbeville and come around. The chase is not over, the location has merely changed. Edward looks at his wet, shivering men, at the horses shaking the river from their coats, and makes a decision. They will run no further. They are tired of retreating. Here, on this side of the water, in a territory he knows from his own family's history, he will stop. He will find a place to stand. He calls his marshals and points to a forest in the distance, near a small village that no one in England has ever heard of. "We will wait for him there," he says quietly. The village is called Crécy. The race is done. The battle is about to begin. The soldiers wring out their cloaks, check their bowstrings, and begin the short march to the ridge where the destiny of Europe will be decided. The frantic splashing chaos of the river crossing fades behind us now, replaced by the hushed, verdant embrace of the forest of Crécy-en-Ponthieu. It is Friday, August 25th, and the tempo of our story shifts dramatically from the staccato rhythm of a chase to the slow, deliberate breathing of a predator lying in wait. The English army emerges from the tree line and finds themselves on a ridge, a gentle rolling spine of land that overlooks the valley of the Maye. To an untrained eye, it is just a field, a nondescript stretch of farmland waiting for the harvest, bordered by thick woods and sloping casually down toward the village of Crécy. But to Edward III, looking out from his saddle with the discerning gaze of a master tactician, it is a canvas upon which he will paint a masterpiece of violence. He halts his horse and takes a deep breath of the cool air. He is on familiar soil, in a manner of speaking. This county of Ponthieu was part of his mother's dowry, a land he claims by blood right. There is a profound psychological power in this. He is no longer running through foreign territory. He is standing in his own backyard, defending his own gate. He turns to his marshals and gives the order that will define the next 24 hours. We stop here. The army, exhausted, wet, and hungry, feels a wave of relief ripple through the ranks that is almost audible, a collective sigh that rustles the leaves of the nearby oaks. There will be no more marching today. There will be no more running. The decision to fight is terrifying, yes, but the decision to stop is a mercy. Edward chooses his command post with a flair for the dramatic that history has never forgotten, a solid wooden windmill that sits on the highest point of the ridge. From the gallery of this windmill he can see everything, the slope down which the French must attack, the woods that protect his flanks, and the long, winding road from Abbeville where the enemy will inevitably appear. It is the perfect conductor's podium for the symphony of destruction he plans to orchestrate. The preparation begins immediately, and it is a marvel of discipline over fatigue. The English soldiers, who have walked hundreds of miles and just fought a river battle, do not collapse into sleep. Instead, they go to work. This is the secret weapon of the English army, not just the longbow, but the shovel. Edward knows he is outnumbered, likely 3-1, perhaps more. To survive, he must dictate the terms of engagement absolutely. He orders the knights and men-at-arms to do something that goes against every instinct of chivalric warfare. He orders them to send their horses to the rear. This is a profound statement. In the medieval world, a knight on a horse is a god of war, a towering figure of speed and shock. A knight on foot is just a man in a metal can. By dismounting his nobility, Edward is sending a clear, silent message to his infantry. No one is riding away. We stand together, or we die together. It bonds the army into a single, immobile unit. The horses are taken to the back, forming a wagonberg, a fortified circle of wagons and carts that creates an impregnable wall, protecting the army's rear and supplies. Inside this wooden fortress, the pages and cooks prepare the evening meal, the smoke of their fires drifting comfortably over the ridge, a domestic smell that belies the coming horror. Meanwhile, on the slope, the archers are busy shaping the earth itself. They dig pits, hundreds of them. These are not trenches, but small square holes, about a foot deep and a foot wide, scattered in a checkerboard pattern across the front of the lines. They carefully conceal them with bundles of hay and loose earth. To a charging horse, the ground will look solid. To the horse's leg, it will be a trap, an ankle-breaking snare designed to turn a majestic charge into a tumbling catastrophe. Historians still argue about the exact nature of these defences. Some chronicles describe terrifying pits, others mention caltrops, wicked, four-pronged iron spikes scattered in the grass, while others suggest the terrain itself was naturally treacherous enough, but the intent is clear. Edward is building a machine to break the momentum of the French chivalry before they can even swing a sword. The army is divided into 3 battles or divisions. The vanguard, the place of honour and greatest danger, is given to the Prince of Wales. He is 16 years old, tall, serious, and about to face the wrath of a kingdom. He is placed on the right of the line, closest to the enemy's approach, to ensure the boy does not do anything foolish, or rather, to ensure he survives the lesson. Edward surrounds him with grizzled veterans like the Earl of Warwick and John de Vere, the Earl of Oxford. These are men who have fought in Scotland, men who know the grim mathematics of war. On the left flank, the Earl of Northampton takes command, and in the centre, slightly to the rear near the windmill, the king positions himself with the reserve. It is a formation of deadly elegance. The archers are not just placed in a line. They are positioned in great hollow wedges, hearses, as the chroniclers call them, jutting out from the line of men-at-arms. This creates a funnel effect. Any French soldier attacking the centre will find himself caught in a crossfire, receiving arrows not just from the front, but from both sides. It is a kill zone, geometrically perfect, designed by a mind that understands the geometry of death. As the sun begins to set on Friday evening, the work is done, the pits are dug, the lines are drawn, the bows are checked, the soldiers settle down to eat. The mood is strangely calm. There is a specific kind of humour that thrives in these moments. Gallows humour, dry and dark. A yeoman might sharpen his dagger and remark that it's awfully considerate of the French to bring so many rich noblemen to the slaughter, as it will make the ransom calculations much easier on Monday. Another might joke that he hopes the French king brings better wine than the sour vinegar they found in the last village. They are scared, certainly. No man is fearless before a battle, but they are also professionals. They trust their king, they trust their bows, and they trust the ground beneath their feet. There is a fascinating, shadowy debate among military historians about what else Edward might have placed on that ridge. Some contemporary accounts, and indeed some physical evidence, suggest that the English dragged something new and terrifying along with them on this campaign, ribaldecans, or primitive cannons. These were not the wall-smashing giants of later centuries, but small, pot-bellied tubes of iron strapped to timber frames designed to fire lead balls or metal arrows with a thunderous crack and a flash of sulphurous smoke. If they were there, and the consensus leans toward the idea that Edward had at least a few, they were likely useless as actual weapons of mass destruction. Their range was poor, their aim laughable. But as instruments of psychological terror, imagine a French horse, bred for the joust, suddenly facing a machine that roars like a dragon and spits fire. It fits Edward's personality perfectly. He was a lover of technology and innovation, a man who would use every tool, no matter how experimental, to gain an edge. As night falls over the ridge, the campfires of the English glow like fireflies in the dark woods. The men sleep in their armour, weapons within arm's reach. The silence of the forest is heavy, amplified by the knowledge of what is coming. They are the anvil, waiting for the hammer. Edward likely does not sleep much. He probably paces the gallery of the windmill, watching the southern horizon, waiting for the glow of the French fires, waiting for the dawn. He has chosen his ground. He has set his trap. Now, all he can do is wait for the prey to walk into it. The stage is set, the actors are in position, and the curtain is about to rise on the tragedy of French chivalry. The sun rises on Saturday, August 26th, but it struggles to break the hold of a heavy, suffocating mist that clings to the valley floor. The world is damp and silent. On the ridge of Crécy, the English army wakes not to the blare of trumpets, but to the quiet rustle of men shaking the dew from their cloaks. There is a surreal, almost domestic tranquility to these early hours. The frantic digging and sharpening of the previous day has ceased. Now there is only the waiting. And in warfare, the waiting is often the weapon that breaks a man's mind long before the enemy arrives. But Edward III understands the psychology of fear better than any monarch in Europe. He knows that idle hands tremble, but busy hands stay steady. He moves among the ranks, riding a small palfrey, a calm walking horse, rather than his great war horse. He carries a white wand in his hand, a symbol of authority, but also of peace, within his own lines. He speaks to the archers, to the squires, to the hardened veterans. He does not shout grand speeches about glory or God. He speaks softly, with a smile that suggests he knows a secret, a reassuring confidence that settles the stomachs of the terrified 16-year-olds gripping their spears. He tells them they are the finest soldiers in Christendom. He tells them the French are noisy, arrogant, and careless. He tells them that today the ground will fight for them. As the morning stretches toward noon, the discipline of the English army becomes a tangible force, while the French, miles away, are marching in a chaotic, dust-choked column, arguing over right-of-way and precedence. The English do something extraordinary. They sit down. It is a detail recorded by chroniclers with a sense of awe. On the verge of annihilation, faced with a force that vastly outnumbers them, the English soldiers are ordered to sit, rest, and eat. They ate and drank at their ease, the chronicles say. Imagine the scene. Thousands of men sitting in the tall grass, chewing on bread and cheese, passing wineskins, repairing a strap on a helmet, or carefully waxing a bowstring. It is a display of professional nonchalance that is almost insulting to the coming violence. It serves a practical purpose, of course, preserving energy for the physical exertion of battle, but the psychological impact is profound. It says, we are ready, we are not afraid, let them come to us. During this strange picnic on the precipice of death, the archers attend to the most critical detail of their trade. They unstring their bows. A yew longbow is a living thing, under immense tension when strung. To leave it strung for hours is to weaken the wood, to let the cast, the power, seep out of it like water from a cracked cup. So they keep the bows relaxed, the strings coiled and tucked into their belts or under their caps to keep them dry. And they must keep them dry. The air is growing heavy, the pressure dropping. The bright summer sky of the morning is beginning to curdle, turning a bruised purple in the west. The birds have stopped singing. The crickets in the grass have fallen silent. Every farmer in the ranks, and remember, these archers are men of the soil, knows what this means. A storm is building. A summer squall, violent and sudden, is gathering its strength to join the battle. The humidity rises, making the air thick and hard to breathe, sweat sticking the wool undergarments to the skin. There is a moment in the early afternoon, around 3 o'clock, when a ripple of movement passes through the English lines. The scouts have returned. They do not need to speak. Their faces tell the story. They are here. The sound arrives before the sight. A low, discordant hum that grows into a rumble, like a distant rock slide. It is the sound of thousands of horses, thousands of men, thousands of iron-shod feet tramping on the dry road. The English soldiers stand up. They brush the crumbs from their laps. They reach for their helmets. The archers step forward to their pots of arrows, thrusting a few shafts into their belts for quick access. They string their bows, the collective thrum of thousands of cords being tightened, sounding like a giant inhaling. But even as the enemy approaches, the atmosphere takes a turn toward the supernatural. The sky, which has been darkening for an hour, suddenly turns black. A flock of crows, or perhaps ravens, the accounts vary, erupts from the woods, cawing frantically, wheeling over the battlefield in a chaotic cloud. To the superstitious medieval mind, this is a terrifying omen. Are they waiting for the feast? Are they heralds of doom? Then the sun is extinguished. A partial eclipse, or perhaps just the extraordinary density of the storm clouds, blots out the light. A strange, eerie twilight descends over the ridge, bathing the waiting English faces in a grey, spectral pallor. And then the rain comes. It does not drizzle. It explodes. A torrential downpour hammers the field, turning the dust to mud in seconds, soaking the coats of the men, drumming against the helmets like 1,000 tiny hammers. Thunder cracks overhead, so loud it shakes the ground, indistinguishable from the roar of the mythical cannons. In the midst of this deluge, the English archers do something vital, a small gesture that will decide the fate of nations. They unstring their bows again, or more likely, they crouch over them, sheltering the strings with their bodies, tucking the coiled hemp under their helmets or inside their doublets. They know that a wet string stretches, loses its snap, and becomes useless. They protect their weapons with the tenderness of mothers protecting infants. They wait out the squall, soaked to the bone, shivering not from cold, but from the adrenaline dumping into their bloodstreams. The rain passes as quickly as it arrived, leaving the earth glistening and slick. The sun bursts back out, low in the west now, casting a blinding golden glare directly into the eyes of the approaching French. It is a final stroke of luck, or perhaps divine intervention. The English are bathed in light, their shadows stretching long behind them, while the French must squint into the dazzling brilliance of the setting sun. And there, emerging from the dispersing mist and the glare, is the enemy. They spill onto the field, not in neat rows, but in a sprawling, disorderly mass. The sheer scale of the French army is breathtaking, banners of every colour representing the flower of European nobility snap in the fresh wind. There are kings here, not just Philip of France, but John of Bohemia, the King of Majorca, the Duke of Lorraine. It is a festival of chivalry, a parade of power, but the English do not tremble. They stand in their hearses, their wedges, silent as statues. They do not shout insults. They do not bang their shields. They simply watch. This silence is the most terrifying thing of all. It is the silence of executioners. The disciplined wait is over. The talking is done. The distance between the two armies is closing, and the air between them is about to become solid with wood and iron. Edward III stands by his windmill, his face unreadable. He nods once. The machine is ready. This segment quietly argues that Crécy is decided before the first arrow is loosed, not by weapons, but by tempo. Edward slows time for his men, while time accelerates for the French. Eating, sitting, resting. These acts look passive, yet they seize control of the battlefield's rhythm. The French arrive already exhausted, mentally late to their own battle. There is a gentle parallel with later professional armies, especially the Roman legions before engagement, who halted, dressed ranks and waited while enemies shouted themselves hoarse. Discipline here is not rigidity, it is patience turned into force. The English are not calm because they are brave, they are calm because they are prepared. Why this matters is that medieval warfare is often imagined as chaos colliding with chaos. This moment reveals something closer to modern war, systems versus impulse. The storm, the eclipse-like darkness, the birds, all feed medieval ideas of fate. Yet the real advantage is human choice, unstringing bows, protecting strings, conserving energy. Some historians argue the weather details were exaggerated by chroniclers to heighten drama. Perhaps, but belief itself becomes a weapon. When one army reads omens and the other reads ground, the outcome tilts quietly long before blood is spilled. Turn your gaze now from the silent sun-drenched ridge to the road leading up from the south. If the English position is a study in stillness, the French arrival is a masterpiece of chaos. The road from Abbeville is not so much a march as it is a landslide of humanity. We are witnessing the arrival of the Grande Armée of France, a force so massive that its tail is still leaving the town gates while its head is already staring at the English archers. It is a spectacle of medieval grandeur and logistical nightmare intertwined. The noise is deafening, a cacophony of shouting sergeants, neighing stallions, the clatter of loose armour, and the constant dull roar of thousands of conversations. There is no stealth here. Philip VI has brought the might of a continent to crush a small island nation, and he wants the earth to tremble at his approach. But the trembling you feel is not fear, it is confusion. The French army is not a unified machine, like the Roman legions of old. It is a patchwork quilt of feudal obligations stitched together by pride and rivalry. Every duke, count and baron has brought his own retinue, his own banner and his own ego. They jostle for position on the narrow road, arguing over who has the right to ride in the vanguard. To be at the front is to claim the glory. To be at the rear is to be forgotten. As they spill out of the tree line and see the English waiting on the ridge, a ripple of shock passes through the front ranks. They did not expect Edward to stand. They expected a chase, a rout, perhaps a surrender. Instead, they find a fortified hill, silent and bristling with stakes. Philip VI, riding near the front, is a man caught in a terrible dilemma. He is not a fool. He sees the setting sun, now blazing directly into his face, blinding his vision. He sees the mud, slick and treacherous, after the sudden storm. He sees the late hour. Vespers is approaching, the time for evening prayer. His men are exhausted. They have marched all day without food. Their horses are tired. The sensible, strategic decision is obvious. Stop. Camp for the night. Let the men eat and sleep. Attack at dawn with the sun at their backs and fresh energy in their limbs. And to his credit, Philip tries to do exactly this. He sends his marshals, the Lord of Moy and the Lord of Varennes, riding frantically down the line with the clear command, "Halt your banners, we fight tomorrow." And here lies the tragedy of Crécy, the moment where history pivots on the hinge of human vanity. The front ranks, hearing the king's command, pull on their reins. They stop. The knights lower their lances and begin to turn their horses, perhaps relieved to have a night's rest before the slaughter. But the army is a snake that doesn't know its own length. The rear guard, miles back down the road, does not hear the order. All they know is that the army has stopped moving. They assume the battle has begun, and they are missing it. Panic and jealousy flare in their chests. Why should the Duke of Alençon get all the glory? Why should the Count of Flanders claim the first prisoners? Driven by a potent mix of FOMO, fear of missing out, and feudal arrogance, the rear ranks spur their horses forward. They push into the stopped ranks ahead of them, shouting, "Forward! Forward for the king!" The result is a slow-motion collision of egos. The front ranks, seeing the rear pressing forward, feel their own honour threatened. If they stop while others advance, they will look like cowards. They will be overtaken. In the twisted logic of chivalry, it is better to ride into a trap than to let a rival ride ahead of you. So, The front ranks turn back around and press forward again. The marshals scream until they are hoarse, waving their batons. But they might as well be trying to hold back the tide with a spoon. The discipline dissolves. The army oozes forward like a semi-solid liquid, expanding sideways as knights try to ride around each other, widening the front until the entire valley is filled with a chaotic, undulating sea of horseflesh and steel. It is said that Philip, seeing his command ignored and the momentum shifting, is seized by a sudden, infectious rage. He looks up at the English ridge, sees the banners of his enemies, men he considers rebels and thieves, and the red mist descends. "I have no more need of counsel," he reportedly snaps. "Attack them. I want them dead." Historians still debate whether Philip truly lost his temper or if he simply realized he had lost control. Did he order the attack because he wanted to, or because he saw that his army was going to attack with or without him? It is a subtle distinction, but a crucial one. If he lost control, he was a weak king. If he ordered the charge in anger, he was a foolish one. The outcome, however, remains the same. The French army, tired, hungry, and disorganized, begins to form a line of battle. But line is too generous a word. It is a mob. The knights are elbow to elbow, their horses bumping flanks, their lances tangling in the press. There is no room to maneuver, no space to build up the terrifying speed that is a cavalry charge's greatest weapon. They are essentially a traffic jam in plate armor. Caught in the middle of this crushing press are the Genoese crossbowmen. There are nearly 6,000 of them, mercenaries hired by Philip to provide ranged support. They are professionals, arguably the most disciplined soldiers on the French side, but they are currently having a very bad day. They have marched 6 leagues in heavy gear, carrying their massive crossbows and parvises, large wooden shields used for cover, but in the confusion of the rapid march, the wagons carrying their parvises have been left behind. They are exposed, they are tired, and as they look up at the English ridge, they see the longbowmen waiting. Their commander, Ottone Doria, tries to explain this to the French counts pushing him from behind. "We are not ready," he argues. "We have no shields. The sun is in our eyes." One of the French dukes, the Count of Alençon, sneers down at him from his high horse. "This is what comes of using scoundrels," he barks. "They fail you when you need them most." It is a classic management dispute. The technical experts explaining why the project will fail, and the executives demanding it be done anyway because they've already scheduled the launch party. The Genoese, stinging from the insult, and with the heavy breathing of thousands of warhorses on their necks, have no choice. They turn to face the slope. They are tired, their equipment is wet from the storm, and they are walking into a setting sun that turns the English lines into silhouettes. They begin to trudge forward, their boots squelching in the mud. Behind them, the flower of French chivalry lowers its visors, convinced that this will be a short, sharp affair. They believe the sheer weight of their numbers will crush the English insects on the hill. They do not see the pits in the grass. They do not see the dry bowstrings. They only see the glory waiting to be plucked. The chaotic arrival has set the stage for a chaotic slaughter. The noise of the French army is overwhelming, drums beating, trumpets blasting, men shouting, "Montjoie, Saint-Denis." It is a wall of sound meant to terrify, but on the ridge the English remain silent. They just watch the chaotic tide roll in, knowing that noise does not stop arrows. The French have arrived, but they have arrived not as an army, but as a target. The camera descends now, leaving the panoramic view of the ridge to hover just above the muddy boots of the men in the vanguard. We are with the Genoese crossbowmen. History has often been unkind to these men, painting them as cowards who fled at the first sign of trouble. But let us look at them with clear eyes. They are not cowards, they are technicians of death, the finest marksmen in the Mediterranean, professionals who sell their skills to the highest bidder. They are accustomed to fighting from behind the safety of their great pavis shields, using the slow, mechanical power of their weapons to pick off enemies like a surgeon removing a splinter. But today, they are naked. Their shields are miles away in the baggage train. They are tired, their legs burning from the march, and they are being shoved forward by the armoured bulk of the French nobility like children being pushed onto a stage they do not wish to perform on. As they advance into the valley, they attempt to salvage some semblance of psychological warfare. It is a strange, ritualistic performance they enact, one that seems almost theatrical to modern sensibilities. They do not simply walk, they perform a hoot. The entire line of 6,000 men stops, raises a collective shout, a deep, guttural roar intended to curdle the blood of the enemy, and takes a leaping step forward. They do this 3 times: shout, step, silence, shout, step, silence. It is meant to be terrifying, a display of unity and aggression. But on the ridge above, the English do not flinch. They do not shout back. They do not bang their shields. They simply watch. The effect is the opposite of what the Genoese intend. Instead of intimidating the English, the silence of the islanders begins to unnerve the mercenaries. It is like shouting at a cliff face. The lack of reaction suggests a confidence that is deeply unsettling. The Genoese are shouting into a void, and the void is staring back with thousands of cold blue eyes. Let us pause for a moment to appreciate the technological mismatch about to unfold. The crossbow carried by these men is a marvel of engineering. It uses a composite prod made of horn, wood, and sinew to store immense energy. To span it, that is, to pull the string back, a soldier must place his foot in a stirrup and use a belt hook or a windlass to crank the string into position. It is slow, heavy, and powerful. A crossbow bolt can punch through mail armour as if it were linen. But it has a fatal flaw: rate of fire. A good crossbowman can loose perhaps 2 bolts a minute. He is a sniper. Facing him is the English longbowman, who is not a sniper but a machine gunner. He can loose 10, 12, perhaps 15 arrows in that same minute. The math is brutal. For every 1 bolt the Genoese sends up the hill, 6 arrows will come down. But there is another factor, one that historians and physicists still argue about with passionate detail: the rain. Remember the sudden storm that just passed? The Genoese crossbows have been exposed to it. The strings of a crossbow are thick, made of twisted hemp or linen. When they get wet, they swell. When they swell, they lose tension. Some scholars argue that the Genoese strings were slack, reducing the power of the shot. Others argue this is a myth, that professional soldiers would have protected their strings with beeswax or leather covers. But whether it is wet strings, the uphill angle, or the simple exhaustion of the men, the result is the same. The Genoese reach what they believe is the killing distance, about 150 yards. They stop. They plant their feet in the soft, churned earth. They raise their weapons, squinting against the blinding low-angle sun that turns the English ridge into a wall of golden fire. Click. Thrum. 6,000 bolts are loosed at once. The sound is like the snapping of a giant dry branch. The bolts fly upward, a cloud of iron seeking flesh. But as they reach the apex of their arc, tragedy strikes. They begin to fall too soon. They do not strike the English chests, they strike the English mud. The vast majority of the volley falls short, thudding harmlessly into the slope or rattling against the shins of the frontline men-at-arms. It is a catastrophic failure. A collective groan, felt more than heard, ripples through the Genoese ranks. They have played their only card. They are standing in the open, unloaded, with the sun in their eyes and an enemy who has not yet moved a muscle. They reach for their belts to reload, bending down to engage their stirrups, a process that takes precious seconds. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. In the frantic hyper-reality of combat, 20 seconds is a lifetime. On the ridge, the English archers shift their weight. The silence is broken by a sound that is soft at first, like the rustling of dry leaves, but quickly grows to the volume of a gale. It is the sound of thousands of yew boughs being drawn. The English do not aim at individuals. They aim at the area. They look at the sky, not the men. The command is given, not with a shout, but with a nod. Loose! The air instantly changes texture. It ceases to be empty space and becomes a solid curtain of wood and feathers. The English arrows are longer, heavier, and fired with a high trajectory to plunge downward. They do not hiss, they roar. The Genoese, struggling with their reloading cranks, look up to see the sun suddenly dimmed, not by clouds, but by a storm of their own making. There is no time to run, no time to raise a shield they do not have. The arrows arrive with the sound of heavy rain on a tin roof, a wet, rhythmic thwack, 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 as bodkin points punch through leather jerkins, padded jacks, and flesh. Panic, instantaneous and total, erupts in the Genoese lines. Men are falling by the hundreds, pinned to the ground by shafts that vibrate with the force of the impact. The formation disintegrates. These are mercenaries who fight for pay, not for martyrdom. Seeing that they are outranged and unprotected, they do the only rational thing. They turn to retreat. They throw down their heavy crossbows to run faster. They scramble back down the slope, desperate to get out of the death zone. But here, the true horror of Crécy begins. They are not running into empty space. They are running directly into the face of the French heavy cavalry. The knights of France have been watching this display with mounting disgust. To them, the Genoese are not tactical assets who have been misused. They are cowards who are cluttering the battlefield. The retreat is seen as a betrayal. King Philip, or perhaps the Count of Alençon, the accounts vary, but the sentiment is shared, sees the mercenaries running toward him and makes a decision that chills the soul. He does not order his ranks to open and let them pass. He sees them as an obstacle. "Kill this rabble," the order rings out, cold and imperious. "They block our way and rot our advance." It is a moment of fratricidal madness. The French knights lower their lances, not at the English, but at their own allies. They spur their horses forward, charging directly into the retreating mass of crossbowmen. The scene that follows is a grinder of meat and iron. The Genoese are caught between the hammer of the knights and the anvil of the arrows. They are trampled by the war horses, skewered by friendly lances, and hacked down by swords, all while the English arrows continue to fall indiscriminately into the churning mass. It is a slaughter of confusing, nightmarish proportions. The middle management of the French army is literally crushing its own workforce in a fit of pique. The screams of the Genoese mix with the war cries of the French montjoie, creating a dissonance that surely must have reached the heavens. The first phase of the battle is over, and the English have barely moved their feet. They have simply stood and watched the French army destroy itself. But now, the screen of mercenaries is gone. The knights have ridden over the bodies of their employees and are accelerating up the slope. The real test is about to begin. The wooden wall of the longbow is about to meet the iron wall of the charge. The battlefield is now a cacophony of screaming men and dying horses, a chaotic overture to the main event. The French knights, having trampled their own mercenaries into the mud, are now clear of the obstruction. They believe the path is open. They believe the rabble has been cleared and the real war, the war of gentlemen, can now commence. The Count of Alençon, glorious in his surcoat of embroidered silk, raises his sword. The sunlight catches the blade, turning it into a beacon. "For God and Saint Denis!" the cry goes up, echoed by thousands of throats. The spurs dig into the flanks of the destriers. The ground begins to shake. This is the moment the medieval world has perfected over centuries, the heavy cavalry charge. It is designed to be an irresistible force, a wall of iron and muscle moving at 20 miles an hour, delivering a kinetic impact that can shatter infantry formations like glass. To stand before it is suicide, or at least it used to be. On the ridge, the English archers do not run. They do not tremble. They simply reach into the earth. Each man has planted his arrows point down in the soil in front of him, a practical trick that keeps the heads clean, makes for faster reloading, and as a nasty biological bonus, coats the tips in dirt that will fester in any wound they cause. They act with a terrifying hive mind unity. There are no individual heroes here, only the mechanism. The bowmen step forward with their left foot, the stepping into the bow technique that uses the entire skeleton, not just the arm muscles, to draw the heavy yew-staves. These are not the light hunting bows of Robin Hood stories. These are war bows with draw weights of over 100 pounds. To pull one is to lift a grown man off the ground with 2 fingers. Knock! The arrow snaps onto the string. Draw! The right hand comes back to the ear, the wood groaning as it bends into a deadly curve. Loose! It is not a single shot. It is a weather event. 10,000 arrows leave the English line simultaneously. If you were standing in the valley, looking up, it would look as if a swarm of angry locusts had suddenly blotted out the sky. The sound is unique, a high-pitched, vibrating hum that deepens into a terrifying whoosh as the velocity increases. The French knights, galloping uphill, shields raised, visors locked, brace for the impact. They expect the arrows to be a nuisance, a stinging rain that might bruise but not stop them. They are wrong. The arrows arrive like a physical blow from a hammer. Clang, thud, clatter, shatter. The sound of metal striking metal is deafening, like 1,000 smiths hammering on 1,000 anvils at once. Here we must pause to address a persistent myth. Hollywood often shows arrows punching through solid steel breastplates as if they were paper. The reality is more complex, and in some ways more horrific. The best plate armor of the day can indeed deflect an arrow if it hits the center of the curve, but a man is not made entirely of plate. He has joints, shoulders, elbows, knees, the neck, protected only by chainmail or leather. The English bodkin point, a stiff needle-like spike of hardened steel, is designed specifically for this. It bursts through the rings of chainmail like a knife through fabric. It finds the throat, it finds the armpit, it finds the groin. But the true tragedy of the first volley falls upon the horses. In 1346, horse armour, known as barding, is not yet universal. Many of these magnificent beasts, costing a fortune and trained for years, are protected only by cloth caparisons or leather chanfrons on their heads. Their chests and flanks are naked. The arrow storm descends on them without mercy. A horse struck by a bodkin arrow does not simply fall, it goes mad. It rears, screaming, a sound that unnerves even the bravest veteran, and thrashes in agony. The momentum of the charge is instantly murdered. The front rank does not hit the English line. It crumples into itself. Horses stumble, throwing their riders into the mud. Other horses, blinded by pain, turn sideways or bolt backwards, crashing into the ranks behind them. The collision is catastrophic. The second rank of knights, charging at full gallop, slams into the fallen bodies of the first rank. Leg bones snap, necks break. The formation, so tight and disciplined moments ago, becomes a writhing pile of metal and flesh. And the arrows keep coming. The English archers are now in their rhythm, the deadly dance. They can loose 12 arrows a minute, one every 5 seconds. With 5,000 archers firing, that is 1,000 arrows hitting the French army every second. It is a relentless, suppressing fire that denies the French any chance to recover. There is no pause to regroup, no silence to shout orders. Just the endless, rhythmic hiss-thud of death arriving from the sky. Down in the crush, the scene is apocalyptic. Knights who have been thrown from their saddles are trying to stand, but they are weighed down by 60 pounds of armour and slipping in mud slick with blood. As they struggle to rise, they are struck again and again. The arrows rain down with no discrimination between duke and squire. The sheer volume creates a zone of denial. To enter it is to die. The French banners, the lilies, the lions, the eagles, fall into the muck, trampled by panicked hooves. The noise is a wall of sound. The screaming of horses, the shouting of men, the ringing of steel, and the deep, rhythmic chanting of the English archers as they loose in sections. Yet, incredibly, the French keep coming. This is the curse of their bravery. They cannot believe that a weapon of wood and string is defeating the nobility of Europe. They believe it is a fluke, a momentary setback. Push! Push through! The commanders scream from the rear, unable to see the carnage at the front. Fresh waves of knights ride into the back of the stalled jam, adding more weight to the crusher. They ride over their fallen comrades, their hooves finding purchase on breastplates and helmets. It is a horrific churning grinder. The pile of bodies begins to rise, forming a literal rampart of dead and dying men that blocks the path to the English lines better than any wall of stone. From the English perspective, the sight is almost unbelievable. They are untouched. They stand in their lines, mechanically retrieving arrows from the ground, knocking and loosing. They are separated from the slaughter by only a few hundred yards, yet they are in a different world. They are the factory workers of death feeding the machine. Occasionally, a French crossbow bolt whizzes past, or a stray horse gallops near the lines, only to be brought down by the spearmen protecting the archers. But for the most part, the English are spectators to the destruction they are causing. There is a grim satisfaction in it. For centuries, the knight has been the bully of the battlefield, the untouchable tank that crushes the peasant. Now, the peasant is striking back. The longbow has democratized violence. A yeoman who cost nothing to train is killing a lord who cost a kingdom to raise. As the sun begins to touch the horizon, dipping below the storm clouds, it casts a blood-red light over the heap of broken humanity in the valley. The first great charge of the French chivalry has not even reached the English lines. It has been dismantled, disassembled, and discarded by the grey geese, the feathers of the arrows. But the battle is far from over. Philip has thousands more men. His rage is only growing. He does not see a defeat. He sees a challenge. He orders the next wave forward. The drums beat again. The trumpets sound. And the English archers, flexing their fingers and checking their supply of arrows, prepare to do it all over again. The ground is already carpeted with white feathers, looking like snow in August. But the storm has only just begun. The narrative camera now zooms in uncomfortably close to the centre of the valley floor. We are no longer observing strategy or ballistics. We are witnessing a crime scene. The retreat of the Genoese crossbowmen has collided head-on with the advance of the French heavy cavalry, and the result is one of the darkest episodes in the history of warfare. It is a moment where the code of chivalry, so often romanticized in song and tapestry, reveals its grotesque underbelly. The retreating mercenaries are not running away from the battle. They are trying to reposition, to escape the arrow storm that has rendered their position untenable. They are waving their arms, shouting in Italian, trying to signal to the advancing knights that the way is blocked, that they need to open ranks. They expect professional courtesy. They expect their employers to understand the tactical reality. Instead, they see the visors of the French knights snap shut. The tragedy unfolds with the inevitability of a nightmare. The French nobility may blinded by the setting sun and an even more blinding arrogance, do not see allies in distress. They see obstacles. They see useless mouths that have failed to do their job and are now clogging the field of glory. The order that echoes across the field, whether shouted by King Philip himself or the hot-headed Count of Alençon, remains a subject of bitter scholarly debate, is infamous. Tuez cette canaille qui nous barre le chemin. Kill this rabble who block our way. Whether it was a royal command or a collective spasm of aristocratic rage, the effect is the same. The French knights do not slow down. They spur their horses. They lower their lances, not at the English, but at the backs of the men they hired. The impact is sickening. War horses, bred for aggression and weighing over 1,000 pounds, slam into the tightly packed mass of crossbowmen. There is no contest between flesh and a charging destrier. Men are knocked down like bowling pins, their bodies disappearing under the churning hooves. But the horror is that the knights do not stop to let them disperse. They hack at them. Swords rise and fall, cutting down the Genoese as if they were brambles, clearing a path for a hunt. It is a fratricidal frenzy. The mercenaries, realizing they are being murdered by their own side, fight back in desperation. They pull out their daggers and stilettos, slashing at the legs of the horses, trying to hamstring the beasts that are crushing them. It becomes a brawl of confused, panicked violence. A Genoese soldier might survive the English arrows only to be trampled by a duke from Burgundy. A French knight might be pulled from his saddle by a dying mercenary and stabbed in the gaps of his armour. It is a chaotic, swirling mess of betrayal. From the English ridge, this spectacle is viewed with a mixture of confusion and grim amusement. The English archers, their hands pausing for a microsecond in the rhythm of reloading, look down and nudge each other. "Look," one might whisper, "they're saving us the arrows." It is a dark joke, but war breeds a dark humour. The English do not stop firing, however. They simply widen their target area. They pour arrows into the knot of struggling men, indifferent to whether they hit a Genoese jacket or a French surcoat. To the English longbow, all flesh is grass. The chaotic melee in the valley creates a perfect killing zone. The French advance has stalled completely, trapped in a bottleneck of its own making. The dead and wounded pile up, horse upon man, man upon horse, creating a gruesome, writhing barricade that physically blocks the path up the hill. The ground itself begins to change character. The soil of Crécy, already softened by the afternoon thunderstorm, is now being churned by thousands of iron-shod hooves and boots into a thick, sucking quagmire. It is no longer earth. It is a slurry of mud and blood, slippery as ice and tenacious as glue. Historians have often noted that the terrain at Crécy was the silent ally of the English, but in this moment it is the primary antagonist of the French. A knight who falls here does not just hit the ground, he sinks. The heavy plate armour, designed to deflect steel, becomes a death trap in the mud. Men suffocate in inches of water, unable to lift their faces from the mire, trampled by the press of the crowd behind them. It is a slow claustrophobic death, far removed from the glory of the tournament. Despite this disaster, the sheer weight of the French numbers begins to push through. The Genoese are effectively annihilated, dead, dispersed, or crawling away into the woods. The rabble has been cleared, albeit at a terrible cost to the French army's cohesion and morale. The knights who survive the crush now find themselves at the base of the ridge, looking up at the English line. But they are no longer the pristine galloping force that left the road. Their horses are blown, heaving for breath, their flanks slick with sweat and blood. Their formations are shattered. A knight from Normandy might find himself riding next to a stranger from Lorraine, with no officer to coordinate them. And they are angry. The slaughter of the Genoese has not sated their bloodlust. It has only stoked it. They are furious at the delay, furious at the mud, furious at the arrows that keep falling. They want to hurt someone. They want to get their hands on the English. The first ragged groups of knights begin to start the climb. The slope is not steep, perhaps only a 5% gradient, but in the mud under fire it feels like a cliff. They urge their horses forward, slipping and sliding. "Monsieur! Saint-Denis!" they scream, the cry ragged and breathless. They believe that if they can just reach the English line, if they can just get past the arrows, their superior strength and skill at arms will prevail. They are wrong, but their courage is undeniable. It is a tragic, stubborn bravery, a refusal to accept that the rules of the game have changed. They are trying to solve a ballistic problem with an equestrian solution. As they plod up the hill, the English archers shift their aim. They stop firing high, arcing shots into the rear, and begin to fire flat, direct shots at the approaching horsemen. At close range, 50 yards, 30 yards, the longbow is devastating. Arrows smash into helmets, punch through shields, and drive deep into the chests of the horses. The wagonberg in the English rear ensures a limitless supply of ammunition. Young pages run back and forth, carrying sheaves of arrows to the front lines like waiters in a busy tavern, ensuring the customers are never empty-handed. The service is impeccable, and the cost is lethal, yet some French knights make it. Through luck, or the quality of their Milanese armour, or the sheer adrenaline of their mounts, they crash through the zone of death and reach the English lines. But they do not find the panic they expect. They do not find peasants cowering in fear. They find the men-at-arms, the English knights and squires who have been standing comfortably on their feet, stepping forward to meet them. And they find the pits. Remember the holes dug the day before? The French horses, exhausted and blinded, step into these hidden snares. Legs snap. Horses tumble forward, throwing their riders directly at the feet of the English infantry. The English billmen and spearmen step in with efficient brutality. They do not duel, they exterminate. A knight on his back in the mud is as helpless as a turtle. He is swarmed, his visor pried open, or a dagger found for the armpit. There is no taking of prisoners, not today. The red flag, the oriflamme, flies over the French army, meaning no quarter, and the English are happy to oblige the request. The section ends with a haunting image. The sun has finally set, dipping below the horizon and taking the last of the golden light with it. The valley is now filling with a grey, smoky twilight. The noise has not abated. If anything, it has grown more desperate. The first wave has been broken, trampled, and stuck in the mud, but the second and third waves are crashing into the back of the mess, pushing the debris of battle further up the hill. The wall of dead Genoese and horses is now acting as a ramp for the fresh French troops. It is a conveyor belt of death, feeding the best blood of France into the wood chipper of the English line. And in the deepening shadow, the English archers reach for another arrow, their arms aching, their fingers raw, but their rhythm unbroken. The darkness is gathering now, pooling in the hollows of the valley like spilled ink, but the battle does not sleep. We are moving from the chaotic slaughter of the mercenaries to the grinding, mechanical attrition of the French nobility. The focus shifts to the slope itself, that deceptive gentle rise of land leading up to the English line. In the daylight, it was a green pasture. Now, under the twilight sky, it has transformed into a grotesque landscape of slick mud and broken bodies that resembles a scene from Dante's Inferno. The ground, churned by thousands of hooves and soaked by the earlier storm, has lost all structural integrity. It is a sucking, tenacious clay that grabs at boots and hooves alike, turning every step into a battle against gravity and friction. For the French knights, this mud is a more formidable enemy than the English infantry. Imagine being encased in 60 pounds of plate and mail, your vision restricted to a narrow slit, your breath hot, and recycling inside your helmet. You are riding a horse that is terrified, exhausted, and carrying a combined weight of nearly 3/4 of a ton, and you are trying to gallop uphill in a swamp. The physics simply do not work. The momentum that defines the cavalry charge, that terrifying equation of mass times velocity, is erased. The charge becomes a crawl. As the French struggle forward, they encounter a new and horrifying obstacle, the wall of their own dead. The bodies of the Genoese and the horses from the first wave have not vanished. They are piled in a chaotic rampart across the front of the English position. To get to the enemy, the fresh French knights must ride over this mound of flesh and iron. Horses balk at stepping on bodies. They shy away, rearing and twisting, throwing the formation into further disarray. The English archers, seeing the enemy stalled and struggling in this gruesome bottleneck, adjust their tactics with a cold professional efficiency. They are no longer firing high, arcing volleys into the sky. The enemy is too close for that. They are firing flat trajectory shots, driving arrows horizontally into the mass. At this range, 50 yards, 30 yards, sometimes even 10, the longbow is terrifyingly accurate. The archers aim for the vulnerable points, the horses' unprotected chests, the riders' faces, the gaps where armour plates articulate. The air is thick with the hiss of fletching, a sound like tearing silk that never stops. It is here, on this muddy slope, that we see the tragic obsolescence of the medieval mindset colliding with the ruthless pragmatism of the New Age. The French knights are fighting for honour. They are driven by a code that demands they close with the enemy, strike him with the sword, and look him in the eye. They believe that if they can just endure the cowardly arrow storm, they will prove their superiority. But the English are not fighting for honour. They are fighting to win. They are fighting for survival. They do not care about the chivalric code. They care about efficiency. The English men-at-arms, the knights who dismounted earlier, now step forward to join the fray. They do not wait for the French to reach the top of the ridge. They wade down into the mud, using the advantage of higher ground to strike downwards. They carry poleaxes, bills, and warhammers, weapons designed to crush armour like a tin can. A French knight, his horse shot out from under him, struggles to rise from the mud, his heavy sabatons slipping on the wet grass. Before he can regain his balance, he is met by an English billman who hooks him behind the knee or strikes him on the helm. It is not a duel. It is an execution. The sheer density of the arrow storm during this phase is difficult to comprehend. Contemporary chroniclers struggle for metaphors, often settling on snow. They say that arrows fell like snow in a blizzard. It is a poetic image for a horrific reality. The white goose feathers of the arrows are everywhere, sticking out of the ground, out of horses, out of men, carpeting the slope in a deadly, unnatural winter. The supply of arrows is a marvel of logistics. Behind the English lines, the Wagenburg is a hive of activity. Pages and camp followers run back and forth, carrying sheaves of fresh arrows from the carts to the archers. There is no panic, only a steady, rhythmic replenishment of death. Historians estimate that the English army may have brought over 500,000 arrows with them on the campaign. They are spending this currency freely. Every arrow loosed is a French knight stopped, a French family line ended, a French estate that will need a new heir. Amidst this slaughter, there are moments of bizarre, almost surreal bravery. Some French detachments, through sheer force of will, or perhaps the luck of the draw in finding a patch of firm ground, manage to push through the arrow storm. They crash into the English line, the impact of metal on metal ringing out like a church bell. But even here, the terrain fights them. The English are fresh. They have been sitting and resting all day. The French are exhausted, their arms heavy, their horses blown. The fight becomes a crush, a shoving match where the man with the steady footing wins. The English line bends but does not break. The hearses, the wedge formations of archers, act as breakwaters, channeling the French attack into narrow kill zones where they can be surrounded and destroyed. The archers, when the enemy gets too close, drop their bows and draw their sidearms, short swords, falchions, and heavy lead mauls. They swarm the stranded knights like hornets attacking a beetle. A knight in full harness is a formidable opponent, but he cannot fight 5 men at once, especially when he is knee-deep in mud and half-blinded by sweat and blood. The tragedy is compounded by the lack of communication. The French rearguard, miles back, still does not know what is happening. They hear the noise, they see the dust, or mud, but they do not understand the scale of the disaster. They assume the delay is just the usual friction of war. They continue to press forward, shoving the men in front of them deeper into the meat grinder. It is a compression of humanity. Men are crushed to death without ever seeing the enemy, their breath squeezed out of them by the weight of their own comrades. The slope of Crécy becomes a graveyard of ambition. The piles of dead grow higher, becoming defensive walls for the English. The archers can now stand behind the bodies of the first wave to shoot at the second. It is a grim fortification built of the enemy's failure. As night fully descends, the visual landscape changes. The battle is no longer illuminated by the sun, but by the sparks of swords clashing and the dim flickering light of the moon trying to pierce the storm clouds. The confusion amplifies. In the dark, it is hard to tell friend from foe. The French war cries, Montjoie, Saint-Denis, become desperate, ragged screams. The English silence has broken now. They are shouting to coordinate, to warn of breakthroughs, to call for more arrows. But the dynamic remains the same. The French push up the hill, the English push them back down. Gravity, mud, and the longbow are the triumvirate ruling the night. There is a specific horror to the sound of the battle now. The wet thud of bodies falling into mud, the sucking sound of men trying to pull themselves free, the whinnying of maimed horses. It is a symphony of suffering played in the dark. Historians often debate the tipping point of the battle. Was it the Genoese retreat? Was it the first volley? Or was it this long, grinding struggle on the slope? The evidence suggests it is here, in the mud, that the French army truly died. Not because they ran out of men, they still have thousands, but because they lost the ability to maneuver. They have become a static target. They are bunched up, immobile, and exposed. The English archers do not need to aim, they just need to shoot into the mass. The efficiency of the slaughter is terrifying. It is an industrial process of killing, predating the Industrial Revolution by centuries. The machine that Edward III built on that ridge is working perfectly. It processes the raw material of French chivalry and outputs corpses, and yet the French keep coming. Driven by a pride that borders on madness, they refuse to withdraw. They cannot accept that the world has changed. They cannot accept that a knight is no longer the master of war. So they ride into the dark, into the mud, into the arrows, seeking a victory that vanished hours ago. The slope is slick with blood, slippery and treacherous, a slide leading only into the abyss. And at the top of the hill, the English line holds firm, a wall of wood and iron that refuses to yield. The focus of our story tightens now, zooming in from the panoramic horror of the valley to a single desperate knot of violence on the English right flank. Here, the battle is not a distant exchange of arrows. It is a claustrophobic, face-to-face brawl. The man at the centre of this storm is a boy. Edward of Woodstock, the Prince of Wales, is 16 years old. Today is his first true taste of war. He stands in the vanguard, clad in that distinctive black armour that will one day give him his legendary moniker, though tonight it is smeared with the same brown mud and red blood as everyone else. The French commanders, intelligent men, like the Count of Alençon and the Count of Flanders, have identified him as the weak link. Or perhaps they see him as the ultimate prize, a royal hostage worth a kingdom's ransom. Through the chaos of the arrow storm, they have managed to guide a wedge of heavy cavalry through the bodies and the pits, crashing into the prince's lines with the force of a battering ram. The fighting here is savage. The disciplined silence of the English army has shattered into the grunt and scream of close-quarters combat. The longbows are useless at this range. The archers have dropped their staves and drawn their short swords and bucklers, swarming around the armoured knights like terriers baiting bears. The prince is fighting for his life. History often depicts him as a stoic statue of command. But let us imagine the reality of a teenager in the crush. He is likely terrified, adrenaline flooding his system, his shield arm numb from absorbing blow after blow. He is surrounded by his household knights, men sworn to die for him, and they are earning their keep tonight. Richard Fitzsimon, the prince's standard bearer, is said to have thrown down the banner to stand over the boy's fallen body at one critical moment, protecting the future king with his own shield and sword. It is a scene of desperate heroism, illuminated by the sparks of steel striking steel in the gathering dark. The pressure becomes so intense that a messenger, a knight named Sir Thomas Norwich, breaks away from the melee. He scrambles up the hill, his breath coming in ragged gasps, mud caking his face. He runs to the windmill where King Edward III stands watching. The scene that follows is one of the most famous in medieval history. A piece of dialogue so perfect it feels scripted, yet it captures the essence of Plantagenet kingship. Sir Thomas throws himself before the king. "Sire," he pants, "the Earl of Warwick, the Earl of Oxford and the Prince of Wales are hard pressed. They beg you to send reinforcements, or they fear they cannot hold." King Edward looks down at the messenger. He does not look panicked. He does not reach for his sword. He looks back at the battle, at the writhing mass where his eldest son is trapped. He asks a question that is terrifying in its calm. Is my son dead? Is he unhorsed? Or is he so wounded he cannot help himself? "No, sire," the messenger stammers. "God forbid. But he is in a rough passage of arms and needs your help." The king pauses. The air in the windmill is heavy with the smell of rain and smoke. He makes a decision that chills the blood of a father, but warms the heart of a strategist. "Go back to those that sent you," he says, his voice steady as stone. "Tell them not to send to me for any reason, so long as my son is alive. Tell them that I command them to let the boy win his spurs, for I wish, if God so pleases, that the day may be his, and the honour thereof. Let the boy win his spurs." It is a brutal education. The king is refusing to bail his son out. He knows that if he commits his reserve now, he loses his final insurance policy. But more importantly, he knows that the prince must prove himself to the men who will one day follow him. He must survive the fire to become the steel. The messenger, stunned but obedient, runs back down the hill. He delivers the message, "You are on your own. Fight." And fight they do. The news that no help is coming seems to have a galvanizing effect on the vanguard. Instead of despairing, they fight with the fury of men who know the only way out is forward. The Earls of Warwick and Oxford rally their men. The archers, seeing their prince standing his ground, fight with renewed viciousness. They stab at the gaps in the French armour. They hamstring the horses. They pull knights down into the mud. Slowly, agonizingly, the tide turns. The Count of Alençon, the man who trampled his own allies to get here, is cut down in the press, his magnificent armour no match for a billhook in the dark. The Count of Flanders falls beside him. The leaders of the French assault are dying, one by one. The prince, we are told, acquits himself well. He does not break. He stays on his feet. The black armour is dented, the surcoat torn, but the boy inside is hardening into a man. He is learning the lesson his father intended, that being a king is not about sitting on a throne. It is about standing in the mud when everyone else wants to run. As the French attack falters and recedes, leaving a ring of dead bodies around the English position, the prince leans on his sword, exhausted, his chest heaving. He looks up at the windmill. The silhouette of his father is still there, unmoving against the night sky. There is no wave of congratulations, no signal of approval, just the silent acknowledgement of survival. The winning of spurs is not a metaphor tonight. It is a physical reality. The prince has survived the rough passage. The danger to the right flank has passed, broken against the shield wall of the vanguard. The dead lie in heaps. Some of the greatest names in France lie cooling in the mud, mere yards from the English boots. The Black Prince has entered the stage of history, not as a pampered royal, but as a survivor of the abattoir. The battle rages on elsewhere, but here, in the dark and the quiet groans of the wounded, a legend has been forged in blood. The boy who walked up that hill this morning is gone. The man who will terrorize France for the next decade has taken his place. This moment suggests that medieval kingship was taught not through instruction, but through exposure. Edward III does not train his son with lessons, he trains him with risk. By refusing aid, he transforms the battlefield into a classroom where failure means death and success means identity. Power here is not inherited, it is endured. There is a quiet parallel with ancient Sparta, where boys were not shielded from hardship, but pushed toward it, forced to discover who they were under pressure. The difference is sharper at Crécy. This lesson is not imposed by a system, but by a father making a deliberate, painful choice. Edward's calm is not cruelty for its own sake. It is faith in the alchemy of survival. Why this matters is that legends often begin as accidents of endurance. The Black Prince's reputation is built not on brilliance, but on not breaking. Some historians question whether this exchange happened exactly as told, suspecting later chroniclers polish the scene to glorify royal resolve. That may be true, yet even as myth, it reveals a medieval truth. Authority is believed only after it bleeds. On this flank, leadership is not announced. It is proven silently in mud and fear. The camera drifts away from the visceral, muddy survival of the young Black Prince and floats across the valley to the French rear lines. Here, amidst the confusion of retreating crossbowmen and wounded knights stumbling in the dark, we find a figure who embodies the tragic romance of this era more than any other. He is John of Bohemia, a king in his own right, 50 years old, and a legend of the tournament circuit. He sits tall on his warhorse, his armour gleaming faintly in the torchlight, his face turned toward the sounds of the dying, but his eyes do not move. They are fixed, milky and unseeing, staring into a perpetual void. John of Bohemia is blind. He has been blind for a decade, the result of a genetic condition or perhaps an illness contracted during his crusades in Lithuania. Yet he is here. He has not come to Crécy to sit in a carriage and offer advice. He has come to fight. He is an ally of Philip VI, bound by honour and friendship, and he has brought 500 of his own knights to the field. But as the night wears on, and the reports of disaster filter back, the Genoese broken, the Count of Alençon dead, the French army disintegrating, John realises that the battle is lost. A lesser man might have ordered a retreat, seeking the safety of a warm castle and a glass of wine. But John is not a lesser man. He is a relic of an older world, a world where a king's value is measured not by his politics, but by the weight of his sword and the courage in his heart. He listens to the battle. To a blind man, Crécy is not a visual horror, but an auditory one. He hears the distinctive thrum of the English bows, a sound he surely recognizes from his many wars. He hears the wet, heavy impact of horses colliding with the earth. He hears the screams of men drowning in the crush. He turns to the knights beside him, his most trusted companions, men who have ridden with him from Prague to Paris. "Gentlemen," he says, his voice cutting through the noise with a calm, resonant authority. "You are my men, my companions and friends in arms. I ask you a special grace." The knights lean in, their faces streaked with sweat and worry, listening to their blind monarch. They expect an order to guard the retreat. Instead, John says, "Bring me forward so far that I may strike one blow with my sword." It is a request that defies all logic. It is suicide. He is asking to be guided into a meat grinder. But in the twisted, beautiful logic of chivalry, it is the only request he can make. He cannot see the English, but he refuses to let the English say they saw his back. He wants to die as he lived, charging. His knights do not argue. They do not try to reason with him or speak of his safety. They understand. In a moment of profound ritualistic intimacy, they prepare to grant his wish, but there is a practical problem. In the chaos of the charge, they might become separated, leaving the blind king wandering helplessly in the dark. So, they do something that has etched itself into history as the ultimate symbol of feudal loyalty. They take the reins of their horses, leather straps slick with the damp night air, and they tie them together. They knot the bridle of the king's horse to the bridles of the knights on his left and right. They create a chain of horseflesh and honour, a single multi-headed beast that will move as one. "Lead me," John whispers, and they do. The charge of the blind king is not a tactical manoeuvre. It is a funeral procession at a gallop. They ride past the fleeing French infantry, past the wounded dragging themselves away from the line. They ride into the teeth of the English position. Imagine the scene from the perspective of an English archer. The battle has slowed to a bloody grind. You are tired, your arm muscles screaming from drawing the bow thousands of times. Suddenly, out of the darkness, a strange formation emerges. A line of knights, moving slowly but deliberately, their horses linked together like a grotesque carriage team without a carriage. In the centre sits an old man with a flowing beard and unseeing eyes, his sword raised high, his face a mask of serene determination. You do not stop shooting. War has no room for sentimentality, but perhaps you pause for a fraction of a second, struck by the sheer mad bravery of it. The arrows strike them, of course. The snow of Crécy falls on the just and the unjust alike. But the knot of knights pushes through. They reach the English lines. They crash into the shield wall, likely near where the Black Prince is recovering his breath. John of Bohemia gets his wish. He strikes his blow. In the swirling melee, amidst the mud and the dark, the blind king swings his sword. Does he hit anyone? Does he kill an English soldier? History does not record the name of his victim, or if there even was one. It does not matter. The act is the point. He swings his sword against the darkness, against the inevitability of age, against the dying of the light. And then the inevitable happens. The English billmen close in. The horses are brought down. The knights, bound to their king by leather and love, fall with him. There is no escape. If one horse goes down, the others are dragged down with it. They die together, a tangled heap of loyalty in the mud. The death of John of Bohemia marks the spiritual end of the battle. The French army is still fighting, still throwing waves of men at the ridge, but the soul of the resistance has been extinguished. The blind king's charge is the last gasp of pure chivalry, a final, flamboyant gesture from an age that is being murdered by the cold efficiency of the longbow. It is a moment that transcends nationality. Even the English, when they find him later, are moved by it. The story goes that the next morning, when the English are walking the field to count the dead, they find the group of knights still tied together. The king lies in the centre, his face peaceful, his dead eyes staring up at the Sunday sky. The Prince of Wales, young Edward, stands over the body. He is 16, flush with the violence of his first battle, but he is humbled by this sight. He sees in John everything a knight should be, brave, loyal, and utterly fearless. There is a persistent legend, one that historians argue over, but which refuses to die, that the Black Prince adopts King John's emblem as his own in tribute. The emblem is 3 ostrich feathers, white against a dark background with the German motto, Ich dien, I serve. To this day, the Prince of Wales's feathers are a symbol of the British heir apparent. Whether Edward truly took them from the dead king's body or simply adopted a similar crest later is a matter for academics. But the narrative truth is more powerful. The young victor takes the symbol of the old, defeated hero. It is a passing of the torch. The blind king serves as a bridge between the old way of war, personal, honourable, romantic, and the new way, impersonal, tactical, industrial. By taking the motto I serve, Edward acknowledges that even kings are servants to a code, to a duty, to a destiny that might one day ask them to ride blindly into the dark. For now, however, the darkness at Crécy is absolute. John is dead, his knights are dead. The reins that bound them are soaked in blood, stiffening in the cold night air. The battle has become a series of disjointed, spasmodic clashes, like the twitching of a dying animal. The French army is decapitated, demoralised and defeated, yet Philip VI still lives. He is somewhere in the chaos, wounded in the face by an arrow, his horse killed under him. He is watching his world burn. The story of John of Bohemia spreads through the ranks like a whisper, a story of honour that makes the survival of others feel like shame. If a blind man could charge, why are the sighted men retreating? It adds a layer of guilt to the panic. The sacrifice of the Bohemian king does not save France. If anything, it highlights the magnitude of the failure. It is a beautiful, diamond-hard point of light in a sea of mud, but it is swallowed by the night all the same. The section closes with the image of those tied reins, a knot that death itself could not untie, lying still in the trampled grass, while the war moves on without them. The narrative now enters a phase of profound disorientation, a period where the clear lines of history blur into a smudge of charcoal and shadow. It's late now, perhaps 10 o'clock, perhaps midnight. The time is difficult to gauge because the markers of the medieval world, the sun, the vesper bells, the rhythm of the village, have all been obliterated by the violence. The battlefield of Crécy has ceased to be a place of strategy and has become a realm of hallucinations. We are plunged into what military theorists call the fog of war, but here it is quite literal. The storm clouds that earlier soaked the Genoese still linger, blotting out the moon and stars, leaving the valley in a darkness so absolute it feels heavy, like a velvet shroud draped over the eyes of thousands of men. In this pitch blackness, the grand sweeping movements of armies dissolve into thousands of tiny, desperate tragedies. The French army is no longer an army. It is a sprawling, broken organism writhing in the dark. The command structure has evaporated. There are no bugles sounding orders, for the buglers are dead or have thrown away their instruments to run faster. There are no banners to rally around, for in the dark, the golden lilies of France look exactly like the mud they are lying in. It is a terrifying democratization of the battlefield. Without heraldry, a duke is just a frightened man in a metal suit. Imagine the sensory experience of a French knight, still trapped in the valley. You are exhausted, your body dehydrated, your muscles trembling from hours of exertion. You have lost your horse. You are standing in mud that reaches your ankles, surrounded by the smell of blood, wet wool, and overturned earth. You cannot see more than a few feet in front of you. Every shadow looks like an English archer. Every rustle of the wind sounds like a drawing bow. You stumble forward, bumping into another armoured figure. Is it a friend? Is it a foe? There is a frantic whispered exchange of passwords, or perhaps a sudden panicked grappling with daggers, two men rolling in the mud, fighting for their lives over a misunderstanding. It is said that in the confusion of this night, many French knights are captured or killed simply because they wander into the English lines thinking they have found their own camp. They walk out of the darkness and into the arms of the enemy, too tired to fight, too confused to run. They are like guests arriving at the wrong party, only to realise the hosts are holding axes. On the ridge, the English experience the darkness differently. For them, it is a cloak of protection, but also a test of discipline. Edward III, ever the master of control, issues a strict order. No one leaves the lines. It is a counterintuitive command. The enemy is broken. The temptation to chase them, to run them down and capture wealthy prisoners for ransom, is overwhelming. To a medieval soldier, a captured knight is a winning lottery ticket, but Edward knows the danger of the dark. If his men scatter to loot and chase, they will lose their formation. They will become vulnerable to a counterattack, or worse, they will start killing each other in the gloom. So the English army stands fast. They are statues in the night. They sleep where they stand, or they sit on their helmets chewing on dry bread, listening to the groans rising from the valley. They are the silent, invisible wall that the French wave has broken against. There is something deeply eerie about this discipline. 30,000 men holding their breath in the dark, resisting the urge to plunder, waiting for the sun to confirm what they already suspect, that they have won. Historians often debate the nature of the fighting during these late hours. Was it a continued battle, or merely a series of massacres? The evidence points to the latter. While the English line holds still, small groups of Welsh infantry, wild, lightly armoured men, armed with long knives, slip out into the darkness like ghosts. They are not looking for a fair fight. They are moving through the piles of French dead and wounded, finishing the job. It is a grim, ugly business, far removed from the romance of chivalry. They move silently, finding the knights trapped under their horses, the men too wounded to stand, and they extinguish them. It is the brutal clean-up of the battlefield, a necessary cruelty in the eyes of the commanders to ensure no one rises to fight again at dawn. It brings a horror to the dark that is almost primal, the fear of the unseen predator moving in the night. The French knights, hearing the soft footsteps and the stifled cries of their comrades, must feel a terror that goes beyond the fear of death. It is the fear of being hunted. Yet, amidst this horror, there are moments of dark, almost slapstick absurdity. Chronicles hint at small groups of French soldiers who, having lost all sense of direction, end up marching in circles. They charge up the hill, get repelled, run back down, turn around in the dark, and accidentally charge up the hill again, convinced they are fleeing to safety. It is the military equivalent of being unable to find the bathroom in a strange house at night, except the consequences are fatal. There are stories of knights shouting "Montjoie" to rally their comrades, only to have English voices shout it back mockingly from the darkness, luring them into arrow range. The psychological warfare continues long after the physical battle has lost its shape. The English are playing with their food. The darkness strips away the dignity of the French nobility. A man who spent a fortune on a suit of Milanese armour and a pedigree horse, ends his day stumbling through a ditch, covered in muck, jumping at the sound of a hooting owl. As the hours drag on towards dawn, the noise in the valley begins to change. The clash of steel fades, replaced by a low collective moaning, the sound of thousands of wounded men and horses. It is a sound that will haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives, a music of Crécy that no ballad will ever capture. The temperature drops. The adrenaline that kept the men warm evaporates, replaced by the shivering chill of a damp August night. The mud begins to congeal, trapping the dead and the living in a cold, stiff embrace. The thirst becomes unbearable. Men drink from puddles, stained with the fluids of the battlefield, desperate for relief. The glamour of war is entirely gone, peeled away to reveal the cold, hard bone of suffering beneath. But where is Philip? The King of France is lost in this darkness too. Separated from his great lords, many of whom are dead, he is a ghost, wandering the ruins of his ambition. He rides with a small retinue, perhaps only 4 or 5 barons, navigating by the light of burning barns in the distance. He is wounded, his face swollen, his heart broken. He is looking for a place to rest, a castle, a sanctuary. But the night offers none. Every shadow looks like an accusation. Every dead face he passes seems to ask, "Why did you lead us here?" The darkness of the night mirrors the darkness in his mind. He knows, with the terrible clarity of the defeated, that the sun will rise on a different world. The France he knew, the France of invincible knights and unquestioned power, has died in the dark. The section ends with a gradual quieting. The Welsh knifemen return to the lines. The wandering French knights either find their way off the field or curl up in the bushes to wait for death or capture. The English army, satisfied that no new attack is coming, finally allows itself to truly rest. They light small fires now, not to see the enemy, but to warm their hands and boil water. The little flickering lights appear along the ridge, looking like stars that have fallen to earth. From the valley floor, these fires must look like the eyes of dragons, watching, waiting. The battle is over, but the night is not. The long, cold vigil of the victors begins, while the vanquished pray for the dawn to bring mercy, or at least an end to the dark. The chaos settles into a heavy, breathing silence, the kind that only exists in places where death has been busy. The narrative focus shifts now to the singular, tragic figure of King Philip VI, isolating him from the wider carnage. We are following the retreat of a broken monarch. It is deep in the night, the darkness impenetrable, except for the sporadic flickering light of torches carried by his dwindling retinue. Philip is no longer the commander of the largest army in Christendom. He is a fugitive in his own kingdom. He rides a borrowed horse, his own having been killed under him earlier in the melee, a symbolic stripping of his royal status. He is wounded, an arrow or perhaps a spear having grazed his face, and the blood has dried into a dark, cracking mask on his skin. Beside him ride only a handful of men, the Lord of Montmorency, the Lord of Beaujeu, and perhaps 3 or 4 others. It is a pathetic remnant of the glittering host that marched out of Abbeville just hours ago. The silence of the group is heavy, broken only by the sound of hooves on the road and the distant fading groans from the battlefield behind them. They are riding north, away from the ridge, seeking sanctuary. The destination is the castle of La Broye, a fortress loyal to the crown, but the journey there feels like a descent into the underworld. Philip is in a state of shock. Contemporary accounts describe him as weeping, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. This is not just the grief of a general who has lost soldiers, it is the existential crisis of a king who has lost his mandate. In the medieval worldview, victory in battle is the judgment of God. To win is to be righteous, to lose is to be condemned. By that logic, God has just declared Philip to be wrong. He rides with the crushing weight of divine disapproval on his shoulders. He thinks of the friends he has left behind in the mud, the Count of Alençon, his brother, the Count of Blois, his nephew, the blind King John, his ally. They are all gone. The structure of his government has been decapitated in a single afternoon. They arrive at the gates of La Broye in the dead of night. The castle is shut tight, the drawbridge raised, the garrison asleep, or keeping a nervous watch for the English. Philip's retinue hails the gatekeeper. "Open!" they shout. "Open for the king!" The castellan, the commander of the castle, appears on the battlements, holding a lantern high, peering down into the gloom. He does not recognize the battered, bloody figures below. "Who calls at this hour?" he demands, his voice suspicious. "Who knocks?" And here Philip delivers one of the most poignant lines in French history. He looks up at the stone walls, at the closed gate, at the symbol of the power he is supposed to hold, and he whispers, or perhaps cries out, "Open your gates, for it is the fortune of France." And of some translations say, "Open, it is the unfortunate King of France." But fortune of France carries a deeper, more tragic irony. He is the fate of the nation, and he is broken. The gatekeeper, recognizing the voice, or perhaps finally seeing the royal surcoat beneath the mud, hurriedly lowers the bridge. The heavy chains rattle, the wood thuds down, and the small group clatters into the courtyard. But Philip does not stay. He cannot stay. He drinks a cup of wine, perhaps has his wound dressed, but the fear of the English pursuit is too strong. He is terrified that Edward's cavalry will appear out of the darkness at any moment. He orders fresh horses. He leaves before the sun rises, riding on to Amiens, fleeing deeper into his own lands. Back on the ridge, the English army remains unaware of the king's flight. They only know that the attacks have stopped. The silence that settles over the battlefield is profound. It is the silence of exhaustion. The archers, their fingers swollen and bleeding, finally lower their bows. They slump to the ground, too tired to cheer. There is no great celebration, no roaring triumph, just the quiet satisfaction of men who have looked into the abyss and survived. They wrap themselves in their cloaks, huddled against the cold, and wait for the sun. But the flight of Philip VI signifies more than just the escape of a man. It signifies the collapse of the campaign. With the king gone, there is no one to rally the survivors, no one to organize a counterattack. The French army, or what is left of it, dissolves. Thousands of common soldiers, the infantry and militia who were stuck in the rear and never even saw the English, realize that their lords have fled. Panic spreads like a contagion. They throw down their spears and shields. They melt away into the woods and the villages, tearing off their badges of allegiance, desperate to become anonymous peasants again before the English find them. The Grande Armée evaporates. It ceases to exist as a political entity. As Philip rides through the night, putting miles between himself and his failure, he must surely be replaying the events in his mind. The delay he wanted but didn't get. The rain, the Genoese, the rush, the mud, the arrows. How did it go so wrong? How did a bunch of farmers with sticks defeat the chivalry of France? He does not have the answer yet. He is too close to the tragedy to see the lesson. He only knows the pain of it. He rides into the dawn, a king without an army, a leader without followers, a man who has witnessed the death of his world and lived to tell the tale. The camera holds on his retreating figure, a lonely silhouette against the greying sky. shrinking into the distance until he is swallowed by the horizon. The king has left the stage, the victors remain. The sun rises on Sunday, August 27th, but for the first few hours it is a ghost, a pale disk struggling to penetrate a blanket of fog so thick it feels like a physical weight. The battlefield of Crécy is shrouded in white mist, a merciful veil drawn by nature over the horrors of the night. The silence is absolute and unnerving. There is no bird song, there is no wind. There is only the damp, heavy stillness of a graveyard. On the ridge, the English army stirs from its cold, uneasy sleep. Men groan as they stretch stiffened limbs, their joints aching from the damp and the adrenaline crash of the previous day. They are hungry, their stomachs rumbling in the quiet, but no one is eager to light a fire yet. They peer into the fog, gripping their bows and spears, eyes straining to see if the French are forming up for a second day of slaughter. They do not know yet that they have won. They only know that they have survived the night. Edward III, ever the prudent commander, keeps his men in formation. He does not allow them to break ranks to loot or forage. He suspects that Philip might have rallied his forces in the dark, that a fresh army might be waiting just beyond the curtain of mist. The reality of the morning is both tragic and pathetic. There is indeed a French force moving in the fog, but it is not a rallied army. It is a collection of reinforcements, militias from Rouen and Beauvais, commanded by the Archbishop of Rouen and the Grand Prior of France. These men have been marching for days to join the king. They know nothing of the battle. They know nothing of the disaster. They are marching through the mist, expecting to find the French camp, expecting to be welcomed as saviours. Instead, they stumble directly into the English positions. The encounter is sudden and brutal. The English men-at-arms and archers, nerves frayed and weapons ready, see shapes emerging from the fog and reacting with lethal efficiency. There is no parley. There is no who goes there. There is simply a sudden eruption of violence. The French reinforcements, caught entirely by surprise and disoriented by the mist, are cut down before they can even form a line. It is a slaughter, not a battle, a cruel postscript to the main event. The Archbishop and the Grand Prior are killed, their retinues scattered. It is a final, senseless waste of life, a testament to the complete collapse of French communication. The fog swallows the noise of this brief skirmish, and silence returns to the ridge. As the morning wears on, the sun finally begins to win its battle against the mist. The white curtain tears, thins, and then burns away. And as it lifts, the full panoramic horror of the valley is revealed. It is a sight that stops the breath in the throat of every man who sees it. The English soldiers, standing on the high ground, look down and fall silent. They have killed before, many are veterans of Scotland, but they have never seen anything like this. The Valley of the May is paved with bodies. It is not a scattering of dead. It is a landscape transformed. The piles of men and horses are so high in places that they look like new geological formations, hills of flesh and iron rising from the mud. The snow of Crécy, the white feathers of 500,000 arrows, carpets everything, a stark, bright contrast to the dark mud and the red blood. It looks unnatural, as if a winter storm has hit a slaughterhouse. The sheer density of the death is what shocks them. In front of the English lines, where the fighting was fiercest, the dead lie 3, 4, sometimes 5 deep. Horses are tangled in grotesque knots, their legs stiff in the air. Knights in armour worth a king's ransom lie face down in the muck, indistinguishable from the mercenaries they trampled. The heraldry that was so bright and arrogant yesterday is now a muddle of stained silk and dented steel. The golden lilies, the lions, the eagles, all are dragged down into the democratic equality of the grave. The smell begins to rise as the sun warms the earth, a cloying, metallic scent of copper, bowels, and wet wool that will hang over the valley for weeks. It is the smell of an empire rotting. Edward III rides out to survey the field. He moves slowly, his horse picking its way carefully through the carnage. He does not gloat. He does not cheer. The accounts suggest a mood of solemn, almost religious awe. He sees the body of the Count of Alençon. He sees the banner of the Count of Flanders. He sees the tragic knot of the blind King John of Bohemia. He realizes, perhaps for the first time, the magnitude of what he has done. He has not just won a battle. He has decapitated the French ruling class. He has wiped out a generation of rivals. There is a story that he halts his horse and prays, thanking God for the victory, but also perhaps asking forgiveness for the scale of the destruction. It is a moment of medieval cognitive dissonance, believing that God ordained the slaughter, yet being horrified by the result. The English soldiers are now given permission to walk the field. They move down the slope, stepping over the dead with a mixture of reverence and greed. The looting begins, but it is a subdued affair initially. They are looking for friends, for cousins who might have fallen in the front lines, but mostly they are looking for the high-born dead. They lift visors, wiping away mud to check faces. They check the heraldic surcoats, looking for the symbols that denote a wealthy prisoner or a high-value corpse. The realization dawns on them that there are very few prisoners. The order to give no quarter was followed with terrifying obedience. The wealth lying in the mud is staggering. Gold chains, jewelled sword hilts, rings, spurs of silver and gold. But the men who wore them are beyond ransom. The English realize they have destroyed a fortune in potential captives, trading gold for blood. Among the dead they find the living. There are miracles in the mud, men who were knocked unconscious or trapped under a horse or shielded by the bodies of others. They are pulled out, dazed and groaning, blinking in the sunlight. The common soldiers found alive are often dispatched quickly, a mercy killing or simply a ruthless clearing of the field. The nobles found alive are dragged to the English camp, stripped of their armour and given water. They are the lucky few, the lottery winners of hell. They look around at the field with hollow eyes, unable to comprehend how they survived when the flower of their nation did not. The most haunting aspect of this morning is the sound of the horses. While thousands represent silent mounds, hundreds are still alive, maimed by arrows, wandering the field or thrashing in agony. Their cries are pitiful, cutting through the stoicism of the soldiers. The English archers, men who live close to animals, spend much of the morning putting these beasts out of their misery. The crack of a mallet or the thrust of a dagger brings silence. It is a grim, necessary chore. The harvest of Crécy is being gathered. Edward summons his heralds. These are the accountants of war, the men trained to recognize the coats of arms of every noble family in Europe. He gives them a task that will take all day and well into the next. Count them, he orders. Identify them. He wants to know exactly who he has killed. He wants the list. The heralds, accompanied by scribes with parchment and ink, begin the slow, gruesome walk. They move from body to body, turning them over, consulting their rolls of arms, making marks on their pages. 1 duke, 2 counts, 1 king. The list grows longer and longer, a scroll of the dead that reads like a who's who of 14th century Europe. As they work, the English army begins to understand that they have not just defeated an enemy, they have changed the world. They look at their longbows, resting against the baggage carts, with a new respect. The piece of yew wood they cut from a hedge has brought down the masters of the universe. The social order has been upturned in a muddy field in northern France. The morning after is not a time of joy, it is a time of processing the impossible. The English sit on the ridge, eating the food captured from the French baggage train. Fine bread, roasted meats, wine meant for a victory feast that never happened. They eat in view of the dead. They are alive, they are rich with loot, and they are the undisputed masters of the field. But the laughter is brittle. They know that this day will be spoken of for 1,000 years, but right now it just feels like a lot of work to bury the dead. The sun climbs higher, indifferent to the carnage, baking the mud into hard clay, sealing the story of Crécy into the earth. The adrenaline has faded, leaving only the dull ache of survival and the grim task of cleaning up history's mess. The silence of the Sunday morning is broken only by the scratching of quills on parchment and the low murmurs of men counting in French and English. We are witnessing the bureaucratic aftermath of slaughter, a scene less adrenaline-fueled than the charge, but perhaps more chilling in its precision. Edward III has appointed two of his most trusted lords, Sir Reginald de Cobham and Sir Richard Stafford, to oversee this grim census. They are accompanied by 3 heralds, experts in the complex language of coats of arms, and 2 secretaries whose job is to turn the pile of meat and iron in the valley into a neat, legible list for the archives. It is a slow, methodical process. The heralds move through the mud like gardeners inspecting a blight, using long staffs to turn over the bodies. They wipe away blood and mire from shields and surcoats, looking for the telltale patterns, the red bend of Bourbon, the cross of Savoy, the lion of Flanders. When they identify a face or a crest, a name is called out, and the scribes sitting on camp stools on the drier ground dip their pens and write it down. It is the doomsday book of the French aristocracy. The numbers that emerge from this accounting are staggering, so lopsided that they strain credibility. The heralds confirm the death of the Duke of Lorraine, the Count of Alençon, King Philip's brother, the Count of Flanders, the Count of Blois, the Viscount of Rohan, and of course the blind King John of Bohemia. In total, they identify 11 princes and great lords, 80 bannerets, senior knights with their own retinues, and 1,200 knights. These are just the men of quality, the ones whose names matter to history. Below them lies a mass of squires, men-at-arms, and the Genoese mercenaries, estimated at anywhere between 2,000 and 4,000. And below them, largely uncounted and ignored by the scribes, are the thousands of common infantrymen cut down in the pursuit. Modern historians estimate the total French loss at somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 men. To put that in perspective, the French have lost more men in one afternoon than they would lose in entire years of campaigning in other wars. It is a demographic catastrophe. Entire family lines have been extinguished. Inheritances are in chaos. The political map of France has been wiped clean and needs to be redrawn. But the true shock comes when the clerks turn their attention to the English side. How many died to achieve this result? The contemporary English records claim a number so low it feels like propaganda. 2 knights, 1 squire, and perhaps 40 archers, and Welsh infantry. A total of less than 100 men. Historians have argued about this for centuries. Is it possible? Was it a fabrication to boost morale? Most modern scholars agree that while the less than 100 figure is likely an exaggeration, a rounding error of history, the true number was still astonishingly low, perhaps no more than 300. The disparity is almost mathematical in its cruelty. For every 1 Englishman killed, 30 or 40 Frenchmen died. It is a ratio that defies the laws of medieval warfare, which usually involved a brutal, even exchange of lives in the melee. This was not a fight. It was an industrial accident where only one side had the safety equipment. As the day wears on, the English soldiers begin the work of burial. It is a task that bridges the gap between enemy and human. For the high-ranking French lords, there is a degree of reverence. Their bodies are gathered and prepared for transport to the nearby Abbey of Valois or back to their estates. King Edward, displaying the complex duality of the victor, attends the funeral mass for the blind King John, standing with his head bowed, honouring the man he helped kill. But for the commoners, the reality is starker. Great pits are dug in the valley floor. The bodies of the Genoese, the French infantry, and the nameless squires are dragged, often by local peasants conscripted for the job, and stacked in these mass graves. There's a dark, dry humour among the English diggers, the kind that acts as a shield against horror. They might joke that the French are finally occupying the land they wanted so badly, 6 feet of it at a time, or that the local turnips will grow particularly large next year. It is a defence mechanism, a way to normalise the abnormal. There is a scholarly debate worth noting here about the fate of the wounded. Some accounts suggest a 3-day truce was called to allow the local monks to tend to the survivors. Others suggest a darker reality, that the mercy kill was the standard operating procedure for anyone who couldn't walk. The truth is likely a blend of both, varying by the rank of the victim. A wealthy count with a broken leg is a patient. A peasant with a broken leg is a liability. The battlefield becomes a sorting mechanism for social value. By Monday, the valley is quiet. The pits are filled and covered with fresh earth. The snow of arrows has been scavenged. Every unbroken shaft is pulled from the ground or the bodies, cleaned and bundled back into the wagons. An arrow is a valuable piece of technology, not to be wasted. The English army, refitted with the enemy's weapons and fed with the enemy's supplies, is ready to move. The list of the dead is presented to King Edward. He reads it in silence. It is a roll call of his cousins, his peers, his rivals. He realises that the war is not over. Philip has escaped, but the nature of the war has changed. He has proven that he is not just a raider, he is a conqueror. The psychological victory is absolute. He orders the army to prepare to march north. They will not go to Paris. They will go to the coast, to the city of Calais. He needs a port, a permanent door into France that he can lock and unlock at will. The march to Calais will be a victory lap, a parade of men who know they are invincible. But before they leave, they take one last look at the ridge. The windmill still stands, its sails motionless. The pits are still there, hidden in the grass. The mud is drying into a hard, cracked crust. They leave the valley of Crécy to the crows and the historians, turning their backs on the graveyard they created. The accounting is done. The cost has been calculated, and France has paid it in full. What this passage quietly exposes is how violence becomes manageable once it is written down. The moment the quills touch parchment, death stops being chaos and becomes inventory. Names matter, crests matter. Everything else fades into mud. This is not unique to Crécy. After Roman civil wars, scribes also counted senators and ignored legionaries. After later revolutions, lists were drawn before graves were filled. Administration is the second act of killing. The deeper revelation is that the true imbalance here is not just numerical, but moral. The English losses feel unbelievable because they challenge the medieval expectation of reciprocity. War was supposed to be costly to both sides. Crécy breaks that assumption, hinting at a future where technology and organisation sever symmetry. Some historians argue casualty figures were inflated to magnify English brilliance. Perhaps, but even reduced numbers cannot hide the pattern. One side controlled distance, time, and record keeping. Why this matters is that once war becomes this efficient, it reshapes politics faster than swords ever could. Titles vanish, bloodlines end, maps redraw themselves quietly, the valley falls silent, but something irreversible has been learned. The quills finish scratching. History moves on, lighter, colder, and far more dangerous. The English army marches away from Crécy on Monday morning, a long, winding column of victors moving north toward the coast. They leave behind them a valley that will never be the same, a piece of geography that has been permanently scarred by the violence of a single afternoon. But as the physical distance between the army and the battlefield grows, the historical significance of what happened there begins to settle over Europe like a heavy dust. The Battle of Crécy is not merely a defeat for France, it is a funeral service for an entire way of life. For centuries, the armoured knight was the undisputed master of the medieval world. He was the tank, the celebrity, and the judge, all rolled into one ironclad package. The social order of feudalism was built on a simple, unspoken contract. The peasantry worked the land to feed the nobility, and in return, the nobility, the bellatories, or those who fight, protected the peasantry. The knight's superiority was considered divinely ordained, a matter of blood and breeding. He was invincible against the rabble. But on that muddy Saturday in Ponthieu, the rabble broke the contract. The English longbowman, a man who likely owned nothing but his clothes and his bow, a man who spent his Sundays practicing at the village butts, not for glory, but to avoid a fine, had looked the aristocracy in the eye and destroyed it. The arrow that pierced the breastplate of the Count of Alençon did more than kill a man. It pierced the myth of feudal invincibility. It proved that technology and discipline could triumph over lineage and individual valour. The social implications were terrifying to the ruling classes of Europe. If a commoner could kill a king on the battlefield, what was to stop him from questioning the king's right to rule off the battlefield? The seeds of future upheavals, of peasant revolts, and the eventual decline of serfdom were watered with the blood of French knights at Crécy. The three estates, those who pray, those who fight, those who work, had been thrown out of balance. The workers had learned how to fight, and they were better at it than the fighters. Militarily, the battle marks the beginning of the infantry revolution. The age of the heavy cavalry charge as the decisive tactical manoeuvre is effectively over, though it will take the French nobility another dreadful century and several more catastrophic defeats, Poitiers, Agincourt, to fully accept it. The lesson of Crécy is that a defensive position held by disciplined infantry with projectile weapons is unbreakable by cavalry alone. This realization will reshape the way wars are fought. Kings will begin to look away from the unpredictable, ego-driven feudal levies and toward professional paid armies. The contract army, like the one Edward led, becomes the model for the future. War stops being a series of duels between gentlemen and starts becoming a job for professionals. The romance is drained away, replaced by the cold calculus of logistics and ballistics. The knight does not disappear overnight. Men will wear armour for another 300 years, but he is no longer the god of war. He is just a heavy, expensive target. As Edward III marches north, his eyes are fixed on Calais. He knows that to capitalise on Crécy, he needs a permanent foothold. The siege of Calais will be long and brutal, lasting nearly a year, a test of endurance that stands in stark contrast to the sudden violence of the battle. But the confidence of the English army is now unshakable. They have walked through the fire. They carry with them a swagger, a national identity forged in victory. Before Crécy, England was often viewed as a cultural backwater, a foggy island on the edge of civilization that spoke a strange mix of Germanic and French tongues. After Crécy, England is a superpower. The victory binds the English people, noble and commoner alike, in a shared narrative of triumph. The longbow becomes a national symbol, almost a religious icon. It is the weapon of the freeborn Englishman, the tool that allows a small island to punch well above its weight class. For France, the aftermath is a descent into nightmare. The defeat at Crécy shatters the prestige of the Valois monarchy. King Philip VI, the fortune of France, never recovers. He lives out his remaining years in the shadow of his failure, dying in 1350, a broken man who saw his kingdom humiliated. The loss of so many nobles creates a power vacuum in the provinces. Law and order break down. Bands of mercenaries, unpaid and unemployed, roam the countryside, turning into brigands who terrorize the peasantry they were once hired to protect. This is the dark side of the English victory, the misery it unleashes on the common people of France, who suffer not only the English raids, but the anarchy of their own collapse. The 100 Years' War has only just begun. It will drag on for generations, a grinding sporadic conflict that will scar the landscape and the soul of both nations. But the pattern is set. The English will win the great battles, but the French will slowly, painfully learn how to win the war, not by charging like knights, but by organising like a state. There is a scholarly debate that often arises when discussing the end of this era. The role of gunpowder. We mentioned the ribole de quinze, the primitive cannons Edward may have used. While they played a minor role at Crécy, their presence is the tolling of a funeral bell for the medieval castle. In the decades to come, the cannon will do to stone walls what the longbow did to plate armour, render them obsolete. Crécy sits at the fulcrum of history, the precise moment where the medieval pivots into the early modern. It is the hinge. On one side is the world of Arthurian legend, of localised feuds, of static castles. On the other side is the world of standing armies, gunpowder empires and centralised nations, the men dying in the mud of the Mai Valley, with the last generation of the old world unknowingly making way for the new. Let us take one final look at the battlefield before we leave it to history. It is late autumn now in our imagination. The grass has grown back, covering the scars in the earth. The pits dug by the archers have collapsed in the rain. The mass graves are just gentle mounds in the pasture, perhaps marked by a wooden cross that will rot away in a few years. The wind blows from the channel, cold and salt-laden, rustling the leaves of the forest. The windmill still stands on the ridge, its sails creaking in the breeze, the only witness that saw everything. A local farmer is ploughing the field, his ox struggling through the heavy clay. Every now and then, the ploughshare strikes something hard, a rusted arrowhead, a piece of a spur, a bleached bone. He stops, picks it up, and looks at it with a mixture of curiosity and superstition. He tosses it aside and continues his work. The harvest must be brought in. Life continues. The screams of the dying have been replaced by the silence of the land. The story of Crécy is not just a story of tactics or weapons. It is a story about the fragility of power. It reminds us that no advantage lasts forever, that arrogance is the architect of its own destruction, and that the world changes often when we least expect it. The French knights rode into that valley believing they knew the rules of the game, only to find that the game had changed. It is a lesson that echoes across the centuries, from the mud of Ponthieu to the present day. We are all, in a sense, riding up our own slopes, confident in our armour, unaware of the archers waiting in the trees. But for now, the arrows have stopped falling. The bows are unstrung. The kings are dead or sleeping. The long, bloody day is over. The history book closes with a soft thud, leaving only the quiet hum of memory in the air. The camera pulls back higher and higher until the ridge and the valley are just patches of green and brown in the patchwork quilt of France. The details fade, the mud, the blood, the rusted iron, all blending into the soft, indistinct textures of the past. The year 1346 drifts away like smoke from a dying candle. The voices of the knights, the twang of the bowstrings, the thunder of the hooves, they all soften, becoming a low, rhythmic hum, like the sound of the ocean or the wind in the trees. You are safe now, far from the cold rain and the sharp steel. The history is written, the ink is dry, and the ghosts have returned to their rest. Let the tension in your shoulders dissolve, just as the mist dissolved in the morning sun. Let your breathing slow down, matching the slow, steady turning of the windmill sails in your mind. Round and round, calm and steady. The darkness is not a place of fear, but a warm velvet blanket wrapping around you. The story is done. The world is quiet. There is nothing left to do but drift sweet dreams